I am calling this work session to order at 7:01 p.m. I am Eric Greenberg, Chair of the CA Board of Directors. Please remember that this meeting of the CA Board of Directors is being live streamed. You can find tonight's agenda and background materials on the CA Board's webpage. Links to these documents can also be found in the description section of our YouTube live stream for those who are watching the meeting there. If you are virtual, please mute your microphones unless speaking. If you're in the room, please ensure that your cell phones are silenced. Board members, please raise your hand to speak and I will record the names in the order which I see them. If you are virtual, please use the chat feature to let me know you'd like to be in the queue. As we move through the meeting, I will introduce each item on the agenda. Before a vote is taken, I will restate a motion as well as who motioned it and seconded. If at any point you have trouble hearing me or any other board member, please say so. I will now call the roll. Lakey.
Here.
Dick.
Here.
Brian.
Here.
Janet.
Here.
Kevin.
Here.
Alan.
Here.
Brian, or Bill.
Here.
Andy.
Here.
Ginny.
Here.
Sherry.
Here.
And I am here. Next, we have approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
So Ginny moved, Kevin seconded. Any discussion? Is there any opposition? The agenda is approved. We will now move on to resident speak outs. I will call on you one by one in the order which you signed up, regardless of whether you are in person or virtual. Individuals have 3 minutes to comment. Anyone representing a group has 5 minutes. Following the marks, the board will have a chance to ask any clarifying questions. Responses should be limited to 1 minute each. For those of you online, please mute your microphones when you're not speaking. Anyone joining us in person or online should not speak outside their allotted resident speak out time. As always, we ask you to be respectful and abide by the general guidelines of civility. First on our agenda today is Amy Bennett. Amy, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening in opposition to the Lake Elkhorn project. My husband and I own a home in the proposed project area on the stream. I thank those who put together the flow chart, and that is what I'm going to address this evening. Because resident speak out occurs before the presentation, it's a little awkward, but anyway. The flow chart clearly shows that no additional resident input will be solicited prior to submittal of the revised proposal. As a result, community members have only seen the prospectus, which was soundly panned by a wide-ranging group of people, including residents, legislators, environmental groups, etc. WSSI, in consultation with CA, have been preparing responses to the hundreds of questions that were raised, as well as developing a revised plan to address the concerns raised by MDE and the Army Corps in their official responses to the prospectus. This is what's been happening over this since last spring. It's not the only thing that's been happening, but that's what they've been working on. In the packet of agenda information was a letter from Columbia staff describing tonight's meeting. It said that the meeting tonight is to provide an update on the Lake Elkhorn project, which sounded very encouraging. However, in the next paragraph, we were told no new information will be presented. I simply don't know what to say about that. Long Reach residents, the Columbia community, the Long Reach Village Board, and many others want information and answers. It is not too much to ask what specifically is being proposed in our neighborhood. Our request is reasonable. If CA cannot commit to allowing residents and other stakeholders to see the revised plan and provide input prior to the submittal of the revised plan, then I must encourage the board to vote no on moving this project forward. The lack of transparency on this project has to stop. One more thing on the flow chart. it says project approval. This should be changed to project decision, as this is a deliberative process, not pro forma. Thank you again for your time and your commitment.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Thank you for your testimony. Next we have Sky Anderson. Sky?
Yep, I'm here. Good evening. I'm Sky Anderson. I've lived in Clary's Forest for 32 years, with the exception of a deployment. I'd like to commend this board for making a decision about the sixpence tot lot. Questions, discussions have been ongoing among many residents of nearby single-family homes, plus the village board, at nearly every board meeting for well over a year. And I'm glad you finally put the issue to rest. It is a good compromise. It can be difficult for a board to make wise decisions based on incomplete information, as is often the case. This can occur when a board has a system of working sessions alternating with voting sessions, as you do. There are advantages and disadvantages to this system. For example, what if you are not given enough information during the working session? It is said that in combat, a commander must make tactical decisions about whether or not to engage the enemy when intelligence gives him or her between 30 and 70% of the information required to make a sound decision. But the precise amount and quality of that intelligence is not known. On the other hand, the best conditions occur when your forces outnumber the enemy's 3-1. All this aside, I'll get to the point. I quickly brainstormed a list of 15 questions that remained in my mind concerning the tot lot issue. Most of them about the Bears playground and the feasibility of CA's procedures and actions, but also about the ramifications of each possible outcome. I'm sure some of you did the same. So it would have been a very difficult decision for me to vote upon with such a dearth of information. I'm glad you are you and I am not. So again, thank you for your decision. And I'm really impressed with tech support tonight. Thanks.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Thank you for your testimony. Next we have Sean O'Donnell.
Hi, my name is Sean O'Donnell. I'm a professional engineer in the state of Maryland, and I'm also a resident of the Longfellow neighborhood. I live directly adjacent to the stream restoration that was completed last year. When I saw that the Long Reach stream restoration was on the agenda, I had some concerns, specifically about the efficacy and the longevity of these techniques. So just to get down to it, so the stream restoration was completed last year. Earlier this year, there was a large storm event. There was a thunderstorm. I think it was in June. It ended up washing out a bunch of logs, riprap, sediment down through the stream restoration. It's still sitting. There's a pile, and it's blocking the culverts under Hesperus Road, right next to my house. And so, for those who aren't aware, riprap is used to line stream channels. It's used as armoring. It's supposed to be there to prevent erosion. It's not supposed to be washed out. It's supposed to be designed correctly, so it's not washed out. So the fact that it washed down the stream, it's sitting in front of the culverts, it's kind of a twofold problem. A, it leaves the stream banks susceptible to erosion. In fact, they're probably more susceptible to erosion now because of all the trees that were cut down. There's no tree roots holding those banks together. And then also, the fact that there's riprap and logs and sediment now that is, well, A, the sediment's not supposed to be there because it's stream restoration, but the sediment is there now blocking the culverts or potentially blocking the culverts. We could have potential issues with flooding. And so the issue that I'm raising here is in Long Reach, we're proposing a much longer and larger stream restoration. And basically the maintenance issues involved. So it's been 4 or 5 months since that storm. Nobody's been there to clean up this riprap, put it back. So that bank has been susceptible to erosion for this amount of time. And my concern is that with a longer stream restoration in Long Reach, that we'd have an even larger issue. So basically that's my concern is the maintenance of this stream restoration. Is CA planning on performing any maintenance? Is that on your agenda or anything? Is there anything planned? And then also the repercussions of that on the Long Reach stream restoration.
Thank you. Do we have any questions?
Yeah.
Jenny first.
Yeah. Has your village board or you contacted CA? Because I'm not sure if it's CA is responsible for cleaning this up. 4 or 5 months is a long time to wait, or if it's still the state highway. So I don't know, maybe we can get an answer from staff.
Sure. This is the first time I brought it up, so I haven't talked.
Pardon me?
To my, this is the first time I've brought it forward. It's so I haven't talked to my village board now.
Okay, well, I guess at some point, maybe I can get an answer from staff as to who's actually responsible for maintenance.
Okay.
Alan?
Yeah, you said you're an engineer, and I know there are all kinds of engineers, so if my question is outside your area of expertise, just feel free to say so.
Sure.
It has been said by some that the Elkhorn, the way that at least the prospectus for the Elkhorn stream restoration is designed is based on sort of older technology, older ways of doing things, and that there are more modern, better ways of doing it. Do you have any insight into that, or is that outside your area of expertise?
I can comment on it a little bit. So I'm a geotechnical engineer. I have actually designed stormwater channels before. So it's I can say that there are better management practices. So the design manual that I believe was used for Longfellow is from 2000, so it is rather dated. There are obviously better, the best management solutions for stormwater, usually treatment at the source. So we're talking like, infiltration basins, rain gardens, that kind of thing. I know that that's not super possible in a place like Columbia. That's already been developed. But that is sort of the best practices now, at least, is to treat it at the source rather than.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Any further questions? Thank you. Next, we have Deborah Wessner. Speaking on behalf of the CA Watershed Advisory Committee. Deborah, can you hear us? I think you're muted.
She's muted.
Still muted. Oh, there.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to address the board on behalf of the CA Watershed Advisory Committee tonight. The advisory committee members have walked the area under discussion in the Longfellow, in the Lake Elkhorn and above areas to understand the size and scope of the restoration project. I hope that each of you has had the opportunity to take an enlightened walk along some of the stream areas we are talking about. First, some facts. Man-made Lake Elkhorn was created in 1974 to capture runoff from the neighboring areas. The watershed it serves is approximately 2,500 acres, and it feeds a 37-acre lake from storm drains and streams before some of the water is eased off into the Little Patuxent River. Starting as far north as the Howard High School, the streams send about 11 times the water volume of the lake into it each year, carrying with it sediment and nutrients from the surrounding businesses and residences. Heavy storms send that water in at such a fast pace that it has deeply eroded and scoured the size of the storm streams, dumping even more sediment into the lake. Over years, the stream banks have become eroded to the point where they are now encroaching on residential property lines. Periodic dredging of the lake is required to remove a lot of the sediment and muck that comes downhill from those streams, and it is costly, as the board well knows. Yet it will need to continue even after the restoration takes place, but hopefully at a reduced scale. It is important to note that there is no design nor action plan for the stream restoration at this time. The contractor will begin design work only if the mitigation bank credit approach is approved. That has not happened yet. The contractor has yet to respond to MDE about the questions and comments raised by the Army Corps of Engineers and the public. There will be ample time available to the CA staff and public to address concerns and modify the design as necessary before any work begins. CA's sustainability team sent a letter to the CA board as far back as February addressing each of the opposition's concerns, and I will not review those again tonight. Instead, here are some additional thoughts. CA has indicated they have no desire to disrupt the wildlife habitat. To ensure this happens for the restoration project, CA could find existing or initiate new studies to identify wildlife habitats in the restoration area. Using that data, CA can then direct the preliminary design to avoid displacing the animals and birds whose home is near our streams. CA has indicated that much lower number of trees will be eliminated than what some opponents have claimed, and that a streamside tree buffer will be necessary to slow the flow. Even now, CA can find existing or initiate new studies with the assistance of residents to identify and map old growth or unique tree stands. Using that information, CA can direct the preliminary design to avoid those areas and assure that the trees will continue to get the nutrients they need for survival. CA can initiate stream monitoring at key points along the proposed restoration area in advance of the project and assure that the contractor who updates those areas will also measure at least annually while the project is in progress and afterwards to identify the value of the improvements. The final design for implementation of this project is still at least 2 years away. In the meantime, CA, who has no legal authority over them, could continue to encourage businesses and homeowners to install stormwater best management practices to reduce the flow of sediment and nutrients into our lake. In closing, the WAC encourages the CA board and staff to communicate openly to our residents with meetings and direct communications, not just web pages, so we get facts shared, we get trust renewed, and we focus together on addressing the problems. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any questions? Alan?
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions, a few. You mentioned that CA could do wildlife habitat studies and we could do stream monitor. I'm interested in why, in your thoughts, that's not, shouldn't be a requirement of the contractor.
It could be a requirement of the contractor, except that right now we don't have a contractor on board, and you may want to do those studies over a longer period of time. We have time now before the final plan is done to figure out where those areas might be. We might as well get those done. If we ask the contractor to do it now when he still doesn't even have the bank mitigation credits resolved, I don't think that he has necessarily the funds set aside to do that.
True. I was wondering if you've heard something different than I've heard, because I heard the staff doesn't think that as many trees as might be taken down will be taken down. And that's different from saying fewer
That is correct.
trees.
They don't
That's
think as
different
many
from saying
trees.
fewer trees won't be taken, or more trees won't be taken down. And I'm wondering if there's data that tells us, that assures us that you're aware of, that a larger number of trees won't be taken down.
We don't have data yet. I can assure you, however, that the staff has looked at alternate ways of putting in bioretention fields down those pathways and in those areas, and that would require taking down trees as well. I don't know if they have done a study to say which has more of an impact, but I know they're very concerned about the idea that they might have to do additional bioretention areas along those pathways.
Great. And only other thing I'll say is really not a question, but I would love WAC's support with the board and staff in reaching out to residents to do more upstream mitigation. Thanks.
I'm sure we will. Most of us are watershed stewards, master gardeners, or other naturalists, and we are reaching out to our neighborhoods. Long Reach has a very active watershed advisory committee that is always out there trying to encourage their folks to do more.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Any further questions?
Yeah, I get one.
Jenny?
Yeah, from listening to you, it almost sounds like you have a design in your mind, or maybe the Watershed Committee does. Is that true?
No, we don't.
Well, the trees, as an example, you seem to think they can take down less, which implies that you know how many they're planning on taking down, and yet there's a new plan that would say you could take down less. So I'm wondering where this is coming from. Has anybody actually come up with a design that we haven't seen?
No, I don't believe anyone's come up with the design. I believe that staff, having looked at what happened in the Longfellow area, has looked at ways to assure that they put plans in place with the contractor so that they don't take down too many. And again, if we do some studies and really look at what trees people are interested in saving as well, we want to make sure that we keep people feeling that this is their neighborhood, that things look nice, that it's attractive to all the residents of Columbia.
Okay, last question, or last sharing an idea. That sounds great. I like a lot of what you're saying in terms of working more with the residents, et cetera. My concern is the timeline. I am getting absolutely no sense as to when that would occur so that there's not a final plan that has ignored everything you're saying, and it's a final plan, and you just can't go back. Do you
Ginny,
understand
what I can tell you,
understand what
I
I'm
spoke
asking?
with the liaison for MDE today, and there is no timeline, in fact, set right now for WSSI, who is the contractor, to finish answering all the questions. They have not submitted any responses yet to the questions proposed by the Army Corps of Engineers, the MDE staff, and the public. That has to happen first. Once that happens, they will sit down and talk about when they might begin to think about a preliminary plan. But first, they have to set aside and say that they're willing to do the bank mitigation credits. If they're not willing to do that, I'm not sure that WSSI is going to be willing to invest $10 million on behalf of Columbia.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I've got a question.
Hey,
Bill.
Debbie, good to see you.
Hi.
Hey, I was wondering, you talked about residents reaching out to residents, and one of the things when we were both on the board together was there was a whole series of things done about how to contact people and to get things done. And there was also a website. I went to the website and it just directed me to a page on the CA site. Is that website still active?
I am not aware that it is still active. I believe that we have to depend on things other, Brian, than websites.
Well,
I'm not sure if the staff has looked at what the number of people that go to the website on a regular basis is, but I cannot believe it's very high.
Well,
People like to get things sent to them or get URLs they can click on and get a response, as you found doesn't always work.
Right. Well, what I'm referring back to is the whole work that WAC did on public outreach, and there was probably about 25 different items on that list, and I wonder if the WAC had actually re-reviewed that and updated it as it says it should do in the watershed management plan.
I am not certain that that has been done.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Any further questions? Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Warren Wortman representing Bike-Coco.
Did you ride over here on your bike, Warren?
Not. I had a sign to carry. So. Hi, I'm Warren Wortman. I'm a longtime Oakland Mills resident and on the Oakland Mills Village Board, but today I'm speaking for Bike-Coco. Bike-Coco is Howard County's bicycling advocate group, and I see Kevin's here, also from Bike-Coco. Good to see you. For the last 2 years, Bike-Coco has offered free bike parking, at the 4th of July lakefront celebration. We use it's been very successful. We use a coat check type process where people ride their bikes to the corral, and then volunteers will put them in a closed-in, fenced-in area, which we call a corral, and then they go off and do their festivities. It's been very popular, and it's been very successful. 2 years ago, the first year we did it, we had 50 bikes. This year, we've had 70. So it's been really positive. We've had people walking by telling us how great it is, and people who use it love it. So it's really great. And part of the reason that it's so good is it reduces traffic. All those 70 bikes didn't get there by car. Also, it's a lot faster. Like, I rode my bike there. I did ride that day. And it only took me 15 to 20 minutes. Whereas if you, on the 4th of July, after the fireworks, it's going to take you an hour to get out of there. So it's a much faster way to go. As a matter of fact, my neighbor, Rebecca Bryant, 2 years ago, she left with her 2 kids on her electric bike. And after we cleaned up and all that, and she got there and got her kids into bed before her husband, who was stuck pulling the trailer, he had to go through traffic, and they were all in bed and asleep before he got home. So it really works well, and we. The other thing is parking. So we use 6 parking spaces, automobile parking places, for 70 bikes, and we had room for another 50. So that's a really, I think it's really a successful way to go. And the success of this is a lot of it is thanks to CA's support. And I really wanted to thank them for that. Kathy Smith was really helped with the organizational process. She worked with us almost daily for a while. Danica Rhines, who made the signs and helped with promotion. And Lakey Boyd, thank you so much for your leadership. We really appreciate it. And at the bike corral, we had a sign put out, and people could sign it and to say thank you. And I'd like to present that to you for thanking you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
That's nice.
Do you have any questions?
Yeah, could I make a comment, Warren?
Sure.
For those of you that don't know, this is Warren's baby, and also Rebecca Bryan, who's on the Oakland Mills Village Board. They suggested this as a possibility. Would it work, et cetera. And I think it's a great idea. It did work the first year. I know there were a lot of complications, but they all got worked out. And they actually took their trailer up to Hagerstown to get, what was it, equipment that you needed.
The bike racks.
The bike racks, because they couldn't get them here. So these guys went out of their way to do this, and they had help from some of the village boards. I see Kevin sitting there. Oakland Mills, I think, contributed money towards it. So we are very proud of what you did, Warren, and what Rebecca did. And you also, it's an environmental issue, reduces pollution. So I want to thank you. And I know you're going to go more in different places. And I understand the Arbor Trust is going to have a bike corral, aren't they, up there or something? Okay, thank you.
Sherry?
Yeah, I was gonna just say my daughter is a committed biker in Portland, Oregon, as are so many others. And so it's great to hear that we're doing that kind of thing here. There are also bike lockers in certain areas so that, you're able to put your bike in an enclosed area. Are there other events or other places that you would suggest that we expand this to based on the success of this last experience?
Good question. We've had one in Ellicott City for the Music Fest. That was successful. That's the first year there. We're having one at HCC on the 19th. It's for Sustainability Day. And we had one in May for the Bike About. And that was, yeah. Oh, the other thing that was nice is that we have actually we don't have to do the trip to Hagerstown anymore. One of our members actually made the bike racks now. So we have 10 bike racks. So that's, yeah, so if someone else is interested, we tried to do one for Oakland Mills for their fall festival, but it was rained out and we decided that people weren't going to want to ride in the rain on their bikes.
Great, thank you so much for
you're
what you're
welcome.
doing.
Thanks.
Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you, and thank you for your hard work on this.
Thank you.
Okay, who's next?
Next, we have Richard Bannister. Richard, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi. Is my video working?
Yes.
I can't really see what you can be seeing. Anyway, thank you for allowing me to come and talk tonight. I wanted referring to the Lake Elkhorn project. And in my comments to the Army Corps of Engineers and Maryland Department of the Environment regarding the Lake Elkhorn project, in which I've sent board members, I laid out many reasons why I'm skeptical of the claims and information given by WSSI and CA. One reason for my skepticism is that 3 comparatively recent documents pertaining to the Lake Elkhorn watershed were not included in the prospectus submitted by WSI or during any of the several public meetings I have attended. These 3 documents are the CA Lake 2016 Lake Sediment Management Plan, the 2015 CA Water Quality Report, and the 2017 CA Open Space Assessment Report. Indeed, the only reference document is the 2009 Columbia Watershed Management Plan, which, while recommending several minor restorations, makes absolutely no call for anything close to what has been proposed by WSSI. It is a requirement by the overseeing regulatory organizations that all related documents should be submitted. The Watershed Committee and WSSI must have been aware of these reports. Significantly, the Lake Sediment Plan details how to deal with the sediment for 20 years, and we are currently at only year 6. Also notable, the Water Quality Report says that nitrogen levels are normal and the phosphorus levels only rise during heavy storms. Maryland Department of the Environment have asked how this proposal will improve on normal. My comments on these documents dealt with many points, but I've selected these due to time restraints. A reading of these documents shows CA has recent plans and proposals, yet they have been abandoned in favor of this destructive proposal. I, for one, would like to hear why. A reading of these I encourage the board to listen to tonight's presentation with an open mind, as I sincerely did on the first meeting that was held on this public meeting. But I also encourage a healthy dose of skepticism. Personally, I have become even more skeptical having visited most of the stream restorations completed in Columbia. I have seen that they are failing. My allotted 3 minutes won't allow me to go into details of what I found, so I'll get to that another time. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any questions? Alan?
Yeah, Richard, you talked about documents that should have been submitted, and if I understood you correctly, the 3 documents you mentioned were CA documents.
Yeah.
I'm not connecting the dots why WSSI should have submitted our documents, or am I misunderstanding your point?
Well, no, actually, I believe that they should have done because one of the asks for a submittal of a proposal like this, and one of the asks by the Army Corps of Engineers or MDE, I can't remember which one of it, might be both, says they want to have
relevant.
Yeah, all relevant, thank you, all relevant documents pertaining to this proposal. Now, the only one that was mentioned was the CA 2009, got to look for the name of it. Anyway, Columbia Watershed Management Plan. And that it was, making the claim that that was what was the reason why they were applying to do this project. And these other projects, there's a lot of contra information in the Lake Sediment Management Plan. That we already had a plan of how to deal with any sediment that was being washed downstream. And we also, the water quality report states that the pollution levels are normal in our lakes, and the phosphorus, which these are nutrients, by the way, these nutrients, the phosphorus only rises in heavy storms, And no stream restoration is going to really make much of an impact on that. In fact, removal of trees is a scientific report that, that I found that says that, and this was done on the Potomac River upstream, similar streams to ours in the Potomac, found that the tree removal raises nitrogen levels. So what we have now in this watershed, with the amount of trees that we have, that's what possibly is keeping our nitrogen levels normal. When taking them out is quite likely to make them worse.
Great.
So yeah, these are relevant. These are documents that really should have been referenced and have not been referenced at any point.
So can I just to make sure I'm understanding, is it your contention that WSSI knew about those documents and chose not to submit them, or that CA should have submitted them, or the CA should have given them to WSSI? What prevented them from being submitted from your point of view?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's just that, I've been, people would describe me as a layperson. As a layperson who's looked into the restoration and this proposal in some detail, if I can find them, it surprises me that it appears that the Watershed Committee and the WSSI were unaware of them.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you.
That's how it appears. I don't know whether they were or not, and I don't know why they might have been left out. That's not for me to know, for me to say.
Bill?
Yes. Good evening, Mr. Bannister. I have a question for you. With relation to this water quality document that you spoke of a couple of times, could you relate to me the wisdom of relying on water quality testing that is, I believe you're saying, 6 years old, and the assumption that the water quality has been static for that entire time, much less 2 years from now when construction would actually start? Could you give me an idea of how that is a valid, logical choice?
Well, I mean, if it's not a good report now, then when does a report like that expire? I mean, basically, Columbia is the development of Columbia. It's in this area at least is complete, and it's been completed for most of it for 40 years or more. So basically, the actual erosion of the stream is probably decreasing because most of the erosion that is going to happen has happened. And that the nitrogen levels, if they were normal in 2016, well, then we should have a report saying that they are elevated now and that they are rising at some alarming rate. But the report that we have, right, says that they are normal.
Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Next, we have Arlene Kerber.
What's the last name?
Kerber.
Hi, yes, my name is Arlene Kerber, and I'm from Harper's Choice. I've lived on Mad River Lane for about 43 years, and our house backs up on the stream re-engineering. I'm not calling it stream restoration, I'm calling it re-engineering. And so I'm here just to let Lake Elkhorn homeowners and any of you who are interested that I and some of our neighbors are not at all happy with that re-engineering restoration. Now, what did we have there formerly? We had a flat land, wooded, hardwood wooded area along the stream. And it was an area with some understory that was easy to walk through. People could walk their dogs, kids could play in the area. It was a beautiful area. And then the re-engineering came with multiple bulldozers, took down hundreds of trees, took the whole area down to the bare ground, left stumps, lumps, everything. Some of it they cleared up, but there was a lot of stumps and lumps and gravel and stuff left in place. Then, of course, the summer came, and in came the invasive stiltgrass. So now, almost 2 years later, we have stiltgrass, which is this high and bowing over, and covers up any kind of emerging vegetation that might try to get through. So I go down to the same area, and this is what I see. I see hardly any trees in that area, might be one or two, hardly any trees. I see, it's impossible to walk because it's lumpy and you have to look every time you take a step that you won't sprain your ankle. And you see stilt grass, which is not attractive and covers up everything. And I just want to let people know that I and some of our neighbors are not very happy, and I would hate to see Lake Elkhorn go down that same path because the ecosystem has been pretty much destroyed as it was in that area. And this is what we have left.
I've got a question.
Thank you. Brian.
Yes, I've got one question before you leave. I appreciate you coming in. I'd really like to know what outreach did you receive before this project? Did you know what you was going to get before this happened?
Oh, well, that's an interesting thing too. Because yes, I did go way back 3 years ago to some of the initial meetings, and my neighbor was not here. She went to all of them. But yes, initially the story was we're going to take out a few trees, we're going to use those trees, and we can put them along the bank of the stream to keep erosion from going away. And that was the story. It was a totally different thing. They brought in at least 2, maybe 3 bulldozers, took it to the ground, and takes hundreds of trees away. Hundreds of them. And it has totally changed the ecosystem. And, you know, when you talk about stilt grass being invasive, you have no diversity there, plant diversity with that. And without plant diversity, you're not going to get animal diversity. So it has destroyed it. And so that's something that everybody here needs to look very carefully about in this new Elkhorn re-engineering.
Any further questions?
Alan has.
Ellen?
You talked about the areas it was before used by kids and dogs and people walking their dogs and so on. What kind of uses are you seeing now?
Well, you can't walk in there because it was basically a fairly level area. But when they came in with the bulldozers, they took a lot of the trees out, it's true, that were bulldozed down. But there are, behind my place, there are stumps that are left. They didn't smooth it out. There's some gravelly stones, just left over from bulldozing down everything, and it's just really lumpy. You cannot walk down there. If you walk, you have to look at every step because you could fall into a hole, sprain your leg or whatever. So you can't use it. No, you can't. I can hardly get down to the stream from my side without being very careful.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry to hear that.
So
Thank you.
and so to see a beautiful ecosystem there, obviously not perfect because I know there was erosion along the stream, but to see it destroyed in that manner, I don't want to wish that on anybody, so that's why I'm speaking up for those in Lake Elkhorn area.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you. Next, we have Dara Baker speaking on behalf of Protect Our Streams.
Good evening. I'm happy to be here. So my name is Dara Baker. I am a new Columbia resident. My introduction to Columbia's glorious trees is learning a project like this is going to happen right behind my house. I live 20 feet from the stream. So I am frustrated to find myself in the same position as a year ago, learning about the massive construction project that will have a negative effect on my life and on that of my neighbors for years and a generation to come, not from CA, not from CA's representatives, the Watershed Advisory Committee, not from the steward or the vendor, but from my neighbors. I found out about this, on Sunday night when one of my Protect Our Stream colleagues mentioned that there was going to be the hearing. Like a lot of people, I don't necessarily haunt the CA website looking for the next board meeting, life. So we are here tonight because WSSI wants to tell you that they have a plan to assure the CA that CA board input and that they care about public input. my experience in the past year and my research into their efforts to get this project approved tell a completely different story. This workflow that you have in front of you tells you absolutely nothing more than we knew a year ago. First, they've decided this time, they could have decided this time to let every homeowner know that they're speaking tonight. They know who we are. Instead, it's buried as part of the regular agenda. Second, they could have let the groups and individuals who wrote in opposition to the project know that they intend to speak so that we could be prepared, but instead, they are given an hour to speak to you, and we each get 3 to 5 minutes in sort of this hodgepodge manner. Third, the little bit that was circulated in advance, I'd like to be able to review and comment, but it doesn't really give me any information. It wouldn't, to me, it wouldn't have been accepted by a vendor someplace else as an answer and as a workflow and explanation of how things are going. It does not include correct information on what happened in the gap between February 2022 and winter 2023, including multiple extensions of the comment and revisions required by the vendor. And once again, there's nothing here stating that soliciting input means taking action on the input, which is a really critical point here. So I've spent the last year getting to know what STREAM projects look like, what it does to the environment, and receiving clear input from administrative bodies, environmental groups, and knowledgeable experts that the plan for Lake Elkhorn is just bad. I'd like to know why CA is ignoring their own climate vulnerability assessment that says that one of the main reasons why CA residents are protected from increased rain and flooding is the depth of our streams. Stream restorations make streams more shallow, increasing the chances for flooding. I'd like to know why WSSI and Davie Resource Group, who are telling us that we can trust them with the precious resource of our green spaces and our homes, why they tried to do an end run around the administrative approval process by submitting a second UMBI application before their first was adjudicated. I'd like to know how CA responded to the multiple requests from MDE and Army Corps of Engineers regarding maintenance of the project, the request to remove Reach 1, High Tor Hill to Jackson Pond, and the funding. So this idea that a lot of funding will be in here. The release of credits was originally they wanted 80% of the credits before they even started the construction, which they could then sell, which would actually give them funds. And that is something that both MDE and the Army Corps of Engineers have been very critical of. Having the CA watershed stewards in the advisory committee as the public whose comments is honestly an insult. Not a single member of that group has offered to speak to me or my volunteer group. I have heard nothing from them that makes me think that they are any more qualified to decide if this is a good project for me or any other CA member than anyone off the street who's never heard of this before. They don't know what, So the stewards should not be considered part of the public. They have been this project from 100% since its inception, and in my experience, cannot be counted on to represent a critical view or ask difficult questions. Most important, has WSSI put in writing that any of the input they receive will have an impact? Will CA's board or the public be able to vote on each reach and each step in the construction project? What design implications can we actually change? Unless it's in writing, it doesn't exist. Has WSSI promised in writing that they will absorb the cost of any blowouts? What happens if the project fails? What protections do I, as a resident who lives less than 20 feet from the stream, have in case of a flood or in case of construction issues? Has WSSI changed their post-construction monitoring? If not, then what's in the flow chart is a complete misrepresentation. The incentive for monitoring is credit release.
Thank you.
WSSI.
Thank you. That's time.
I've got a few more, but I also just want to say no plan is not a good thing.
Thank you. Ginny.
Yeah. Ms. Baker, you raised a lot of questions that you are saying you'd like answers to. Would you be willing to send this in writing to the board?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. For the,
Sherry.
Sherry.
Yeah, I do understand your concern about this, especially as somebody who's new to the community. And I've been working with the Watershed Advisory as the liaison to CA and the community for quite a while. And certainly in the years that I've lived here, one of the things that I've seen over time is the effects of the increased rainfall, the effects of the increased erosion. We're constantly hearing from folks who are concerned about flooding in their community. So it's hard to get that perspective, and I do understand it. Are you aware that the folks on the Watershed Advisory Committee represent their communities? They are nominated for that committee. They submit their credentials, and then they're voted on by the board. And most of them have considerable credentials in this area, as far as training as watershed stewards, as far as hydrology, lots of different scientific background. So I just want to make you aware of that. You might want to talk to some folks at that committee, and I'm certainly willing to talk to you.
So
Okay.
I have interacted with a number of members of the committee. To be honest, my only experience with them is seeing them attempt to take down some ivy. And I have had, since I got introduced to this project a year ago, I have had numerous conversations with people. I actually hosted events and hosted sort of information sessions for people in the community. I did quite a bit of work that we were hoping that you all and the watershed stewards would do to provide a more realistic view of what can happen rather than only the rosiest view of what a project like this can look like.
Thank you. Ellen?
Yeah, I just want to be clear. Early in your presentation, you talked about they didn't let us know, and I just want to make sure I understand who the they is that you're referring to.
Well, either
Not
you
by
all
name, but-
or the vendor, or sort of everyone here knowing that all of our names are available in all of the material that you received, that WSSI received, and I'm presuming that has been shared with CA for everyone who wrote in opposition. And y'all know that we've been at these presentations often enough.
Okay. The other thing that is going to sound like it may not be related, but I think it is related to how we handle this issue. You used the phrase, you talked about yourself and others as Columbia members or CA members. And I guess, are you aware that you're not a member of CA, that the only 10 members of CA are the 10 people who sit on this board?
Sorry, that may have been a terminology issue because I'm a little anxious.
Sorry, not a problem, and I'm not faulting you
Yep.
for it. For me, it's a question of how does our model that we currently use really make the community invested in us and us invested in the community sufficiently when the only actual 10 members of CA are the 10 members who make themselves the board members, and that residents are not actually members of CA.
And I guess I would care about this even if it wasn't my backyard, because this is incredibly important to me. The reason why we all live in CA is because of the way that it looks and feels. And giant, large-scale projects like this without guarantees in writing that we can look to in the future mean that we don't get what we hope to. So I want to thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you. Next, we have Sharon Boyce. Sharon? Sharon, are you there?
I'm here. Yep, sorry, took me a second. Good evening. My name is Sharon Boyce. Thank you for this opportunity to state my opposition to the 6-mile-long Lake Elkhorn project as proposed again. My family moved to Columbia in 1969. I'm sorry, I'm representing Protect Our Streams Longfellow, so I should get 5 minutes.
No. There's already been a representative from Protect Our Streams, so you have 3. Sorry.
Like many other residents, I've always held a deep sense of respect and appreciation for forested stream valleys and wetlands. You can imagine my surprise when I discovered that Columbia has turned to a process that strips the trees and vegetation in the stream corridors. They re-engineer the stream banks, and they replant the areas with small trees and grasses, but invasive species are quick to move in. We're told this is necessary to reduce the silt and sediment and pollutants in our man-made sediment catch ponds and lakes, which were designed for the purpose of that very thing. Here's the problem. The Lake Elkhorn watershed, home to 215 species of birds and long-eared bats, is nearly halfway covered in impervious surfaces. Stream restorations do not mitigate upland stormwater runoff where it's occurring. This runoff starts on our roofs and driveways, lawns, streets. It all washes into the nearest stream. This polluted, gritty stormwater builds in speed and turbidity, and when it reaches a certain height, it scours the stream banks away, adding more silt and sediment into the streams. Stream restoration is an attempt to mitigate a situation in the middle of it. They remove the silt and sediment that is accumulated over the decades, but they do not stop the problem from happening. They do not fix the root cause. The stormwater runoff is allowed to continue to deposit silt and sediment into the streams, and the accumulation starts all over again. Our ponds and lakes are supposed to be on a routine maintenance schedule, and we should have a dredging fund in place for this to happen. I was equally surprised a few nights ago when I attended a presentation by the Watershed Advisory Committee, where they were at a village board meeting with this presentation, and it was as if our group, Protect Our Streams, had done that presentation. There was lovely slides of all of these upwind stormwater runoff techniques, and I'm asking if they know that is the problem, how could they send a letter of support on this project, and how can they still support it tonight? How is it different than it was a year ago? And what is going to be done about the 120 street falls that are still blasting this gritty, polluted stormwater into the stream? You'll take the forest, but you're not going to fix the problem. You're taking all the good to try to fix the end without fixing the beginning. We must stop this project right now until we're allowed to see the new plans for the entire watershed. We should hire an outside independent party with no financial interest at stake and come up with a new plan that will allow the stream banks to self-recover and protects our natural resources, our environment, and our quality of life. Whatever you do, please stop this project and include everyone on a new plan before this one is approved. I thank you for your immediate consideration. And I had a couple of very quick answers to a few questions that were asked if you were interested.
Thank you. That's time. Do you have any questions? Ellen?
2 questions. I know you're very familiar with the Longfellow project that State Highways did. You live there, and I've walked that area with you. Have you heard anything from either WSSI, CA, or anybody that leads you to believe that this Lake Elkhorn project will be handled any differently?
I've had a couple of board members tell me that they have learned from Longfellow and that this will be handled differently. But the thing is, if CA isn't going to have the oversight that you're saying that you're going to have after this project is approved, how are you going to have the oversight? The CA board isn't even included in that flow chart after tonight's meeting. So really, it's like you're talking the talk, but you need to walk the talk. You've got to have that oversight, and I haven't seen that.
Great, thank you. And the second question is, it has been alleged to us, and I could because it's a public document, but I won't say who alleged it, that, and this is a quote from their document, it says, the folks from the Protect Our Streams group would have you believe that all of our neighbors vehemently oppose any talk of stream restoration. Have you or anybody that you're aware of in Protect Our Streams ever made a claim that all neighbors in that area vehemently oppose any talk of stream restoration?
I've never used that specific language, nor have I heard anybody use that specific language.
How about the concept of that if you or anybody you know of claim that nobody approves?
We don't need to interrogate.
Well, the concept I would say is that 9 out of 10 disapprove. There are a couple of neighbors on the project that did a video for the Columbia Association saying that it looked like a nuclear war, but then a couple of amphibians came back and they were learning to adjust.
Great.
Now, that was quite some time ago, and I don't know if they still feel that way. I haven't talked to them, but I mean, so not every person is, and I wouldn't have made that statement, and I don't know who did, but I sure would like to know.
Thank you. Any further questions?
I've just got a question. Yeah, Sharon, thank you for coming in and talking again. You referred to the flow chart. Are there anything else that you feel that should be in this flow chart, or you feel that's missing from this flow chart that should be adjusted?
Yeah, Absolutely. There needs to be a square in there before the UMBI, the Umbrella Mitigation Banking Instrument, and prospectus is approved that shows us what their plan is. The mitigation bank is a huge part of the plan. And I think that there's like a disconnect there. We were shown a proposed plan for them to be able to apply for this UMBI. And that does need to be approved, but the stream restoration can still be approved separately from the UMBI. They are two different things. And once a project has been approved, they can't make big changes to the plans without submitting a new permit for alterations. They can change a little. There is a little flexibility in there, but not after it's been approved. You really do lose that, and you guys are going to lose your authority over the project because it's going to have to stick to the regulations, you know, from the permits and what was filed with MDE and the Army Corps and Howard County and everybody. There's multiple layers involved. So it's not like, oh, they could just change the plan. I mean, a little bit. And I real quick wanted to say regarding the culvert, it has prescribed, that's maintained by the county. I just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you. Any further comments? Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, guys.
Last, we have Josh Friedman representing Long Reach Community Association.
Thank you, and good evening. My name is Josh Friedman. I am speaking on behalf of the Long Reach Community Association, the largest village in Columbia. I don't mind mentioning that as often as I can. So I'm grateful for this opportunity to speak to you. You know, as a village, we were made aware of this project almost 2 years ago now. And at first, it sounded like a win-win situation. The opportunity to have stream restoration, to protect our watershed. Most importantly, we were sold that the removal of trees would be at an absolute minimum and that no more trees would be removed than absolutely necessary to carry out flood mitigation and preserve the streamways. Unfortunately, you know, 2 years later, we have a lot of questions, a lot of unanswered questions. There are three big questions, as you've heard from a number of the other residents who have spoken this evening. We still do not know what the size and scope of this project, the Lake Elkhorn Stream Restoration, will really be. Is it going to be 63 acres, 100 acres? Is it a very concentrated, small portion? We don't know the answer to that yet. We also do not know how many trees are going to be cut down. That's a huge, huge question mark right now. It is becoming, you know, precedent is telling us that perhaps we were misled about the no more trees will be cut down than absolutely necessary. The absolutely necessary part in all that appears to have been made without much in the way of accountability or any sort of objective measurement. And finally, as others have pointed out, we don't know the precise environmental impact of this project. That's a huge question that needs to be answered before we move forward. So in closing, this is I think most of us still support the spirit and intent of being able to preserve our streamways, to preserve land from flooding, to help keep our, preserve our open space and preserve our natural environment. We're all supportive of those ideas. The most important thing we're asking you for this evening, and as this project moves forward, is accountability. Hold people accountable, making sure we get it, making sure we get promises, make sure it's in writing, and making sure that we have eyes on. We are holding people accountable for delivering precisely what they are promising the people of Columbia. So thank you very much for your time, and wish you a pleasant evening.
Thank you. Ginny?
Yeah, Josh, I don't know if you've had a chance to read the flow chart.
I did review it, yes, ma'am.
In your opinion, in terms of accountability, are there adequate, excuse me, times here when you feel the community can get involved in a meaningful way and learn answers to your questions and have input, meaningful input that can make a difference?
Well, from what I see, no, because it sounds like once It sounds like once this project moves forward, there's no stopping it. It's like trying to put toothpaste back into a tube. So it seems like this is sort of our last and final chance. So what I see in front of me, no. What I would implore you to consider is as you move forward that you can put those safeguards in place.
Okay, so is that like a fourth part of your testimony, or bring it back to the board?
Kind of goes to that third part, just making sure that there's accountability.
That would be part of accountability, okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am.
Any further questions? I do have one question. So you talked about accountability. Are there any particular safeguards that we should look into?
Well, I think the most important thing, just glaring example, is this notion of how many trees are going to be cut down. If one person is saying we're not going to cut down any more trees than is absolutely necessary, and then people show up with bulldozers on site, suddenly you're asking a question: are we really cutting down no more trees than is absolutely necessary? So we need to flesh that out and get a real, no kidding definition of what constitutes a tree that is absolutely necessary to be cut down. I think that would just be one example that just comes to mind.
Any further examples, or?
I mean, that's the biggest one right there.
Thanks. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. That concludes resident speak out for tonight's work session. To limit interruption.
Can I say something about this, the resident speak out? I want to congratulate, well, the chair, because you suggested that we have a chance for residents to come out and speak, and I don't know about the rest of the board members, but I've enjoyed it. I think it's been wonderful to get back to that, and this was your sort of project, and I want to thank the staff for implementing it, but great idea, and this was like 4 months ago you suggested it, so might not have been feasible right away, but I enjoyed it. I don't know about the rest of you.
Thank you. Did you actually read my chair remarks?
I did read your chair remarks. You told me to say that. No.
Thank you. That concludes tonight's resident speak out. To limit interruptions during board discussion and voting, all members of the general public participating via Zoom will now be returned to the audience. This means you will no longer be able to show your camera or unmute your audio, but you are more than welcome to stay as an attendee and watch the remainder of the session. You can also watch a live stream on CA Livestream YouTube page. I will now take a moment to allow our staff to make this transition. If you're here in person, you are welcome to stay and listen to the rest of the work session. In order to ensure that the board can conduct business in an efficient and orderly fashion, those in attendance are not to participate in discussions outside of the designated resident speak out time. Please do not interrupt board votes or discussions. Anyone who does not abide by these guidelines will be asked to leave. We appreciate your time and cooperation. Thank you. Hold on, I'll just give 1 minute.
The timer's not working.
The first item on the agenda is the update from CA and WSSI regarding the Lake Elkhorn stream restoration. Dennis?
Before we start the PowerPoint, I have a few comments to make.
Okay,
and what I'd like to start with is all the things that we agree with. We all agree that open space is an incredible asset that should be protected. We all agree that the stream is heavily eroded and needs to be worked on before additional deterioration takes place. We all agree that trees are an important part of the open space system, and we want to preserve those to the greatest extent possible, in spite of what the ash borer has done to the ash trees throughout Columbia, and we all visited that, and there are literally hundreds of trees that are down, but they are important assets. We all agree that native plants are important and invasives should be eliminated. But of course, we walked, and the Japanese stilt grass is pervasive in the area that we're talking about. We all agree that climate change is real, and it's going to affect the country and going to affect the city as well. We all agree that lakes, ponds, and streams are an important resource in the open space recreational system. We all agree that managing stormwater is best handled at the source. but that's simply not possible in a fully developed watershed, in spite of all the efforts that we've made and the things that we've done in this watershed. Stream restoration is a multi-generational improvement, and it is messy. I mean, it's really messy for a couple of years, but it's, we're looking at the next 50 years and what's going to happen with climate change and how that's going to affect the stream that is already seriously eroded. What I'd like to say is that, we all would hope that the residents would address all the runoff from their properties. We all would hope that the parking lots for the HOAs would all be addressed and that point source would be taken care of. We all hope that the county would take care of all the roadways, but hope is not a plan. What we have that we brought forward, it was a good plan 2 years ago, and it is still a good plan, and it really is the only chance I think we have to make any improvements in the watershed and in stream restoration. And all the things, we value trees, we value working with the residents, but this is still a really good plan. And last thing I'll say is when somebody wants to spend $10 million on your property to make significant improvements that are positive, it's something that I would run towards. With me tonight, I have John McCoy, and as was mentioned, the Watershed Committee came out in favor of this. John McCoy, who is the Watershed Manager, has thoroughly vetted this. We have Scott Petrie here tonight with WSSI. And in the background on video, we have Frank Garziano. Not in the background today. But I'm going to ask John and Scott to come up and walk through the presentation.
Thank you.
Who are you going to give them the larger?
To make it easier to read.
Thanks so much. Take one and pass it along, I guess.
This is fixed. I thought we agreed we like trees.
Hey, at least I don't have to take off my glasses now. I just want to take off my glasses.
Pretty nice paper there.
Is this new flow chart updated? Is this a new one? No? Okay.
This is the same flow chart that's in the packet.
Just blown up.
Yeah, just a little bigger.
It's the same one.
Same one. Okay, thanks.
Could I ask, when do you all want questions? Would you like to go through something and then have us sort of store up questions? Do you want us to ask questions as you go along?
Yes, that's what we'd like to do. We'd like to walk through the, just a little more intro and then walk through the flow chart and then have questions.
Okay, thank you. And we'll keep all the questions to the end, so.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you. It's good to see you again. Just as kind of a reminder, we are working on watershed enhancements in the Lake Elkhorn watershed. We have built 11 bioretention facilities. We installed 2 wetland benches in 2 of the stormwater facilities. We have helped residents build 60 rain gardens. And with relationship to the watershed management plan, we have built 14 out of the original 18 or 19 suggested projects. The other ones were either economically unfeasible or we actually didn't control the property. Just key roles in this project. CA is the property manager, and we are the long-term steward of open space. Davey Tree is the mitigation bank sponsor. WSSI, which is Wetland Studies and Solutions Incorporated, is contractor and will manage the mitigation bank. Maryland Department of the Environment is regulatory oversight and approval. Army Corps of Engineers is regulatory oversight and approval. The CA board was approached with the easement approval, and CA's Watershed Advisory Committee is a group of interested and experienced community members who advise the board, the CA board, on matters directly related to the watershed management plan. So in July the board asked staff for a flow chart that would present the chain of events that have led up to where we are currently, and then the chain of events as they move forward. And I'm going to talk to the preliminary steps, and Scott will speak to the rest of it. And what our initial steps were, and it's outlined there in the little yellow bracket, is we set up and asked for a competitive RFP where we had 3 companies come in and submit proposals to do this project. And staff evaluated them, sustainability group and our construction capital improvements group. We actually went out on site and looked at projects that these corporations had done, some of them more mature than others. And in June of 2019, we awarded a contract to Wetland Studies for this stream project. The boxes in blue denote public meetings and participation. We went to the Long Reach Village and presented to them, talked to them about the project. That was completed with their approval in January of 2021. The CA board reviewed this project and approved the easements. That was completed in September of 2021. The Owen Brown Village Board we spoke to in April of 21, and they ultimately approved the project in December of 2021. And with the Watershed Advisory Committee, we actually started discussions back in September of 2019 about the project. And ultimately, the letter of support was signed in February of 2022. And I will turn it over to Scott.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
So, good evening. Thank you very much for letting us come out and give you an update on this project. For those who don't know me, I am Scott Petrie. I am the Director of Maryland Operations for Wetland Studies and Solutions. My background is in stream and watershed and ecological restoration. I've been doing that for the past 25 or so years. Wetland Studies, we are an environmental and cultural resources consulting firm, and restoration work is one of those areas that we work in. As a company, we've restored about 53 miles of stream and restored approximately 1,000 acres of wetlands. And in Maryland, we've done about 20 acres of stream, or 20 miles of stream restoration over the past several years. And many of that is in urban watersheds. One of our major projects is a 11-mile stream restoration project that we did in Reston, Virginia. That was also a stream mitigation bank. And some of the early reaches of that are now entering their 14th year post-restoration and are considered successful by the regulatory agencies and us. And really, I think one of the major successes of that project, and one of the reasons it was good, is the public outreach and input. So as we moved through the process, there were constant public meetings, sharing of plans, revising of plans, and making sure that, you know, everybody was on board with what we were doing and understood why we were doing it. And that is the same sort of model that we've kind of laid out for this project and how we plan to move forward with it. With respect to this project itself, after we got the contract from CA, we first proposed this bank to the interagency review team in March of 2021. So the interagency review team is a multi-agency group consisting of the Corps of Engineers, MDE, EPA, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, DNR, the Maryland Historic Trust, the Critical Area Committee, and NOAA. And they are charged with overseeing the mitigation banking process. This is a highly regulated process. So we began initial discussions with them in 2021. That included, everything from informal phone calls to a formal presentation. We brought them out to the site and we walked Lake Elkhorn. And it's kind of at that time that you get, their initial insight into if they think this project should move forward. If they come out here and they think it's, it doesn't need restoration, they will tell you so and kind of, direct you to not move forward with the project. In this case, they thought it was had potential of stream mitigation, so we moved forward with developing the prospectus. And that's really just kind of like your preliminary proposal for this bank. So it's the early stages of it. And that's the document that was then drafted and formally submitted in July of 2021 and went out for public comment. And it was on public comment between July 2021 and February of 2022. So we received, hundreds of comments. We got comments from both the regulatory agencies on the IRT as well as citizen comments. And we are now in the process of evaluating those comments, developing answers to them, reviewing additional documents that may have been brought to our attention. And once we get through that process, we will provide answers to all the residents that submitted comments and others, because we'll post these responses on our project webpage as well as send them to those who did it, those who submitted comments. If the agencies, after we answer their questions and answer the public questions, still are on board with the projects, that's when we would get approval, and that's when a decision would be made. And if it is an approval, then we would move kind of down into the next steps, where we would do more detailed existing condition studies, and that's where you get your wetland delineations, your forest stand delineations, a detailed survey of the different types of infrastructure, as well as detailed tree survey, which is not required by the agency, but we are proposing to survey any trees 12 inches and greater DBH, so that's the height at about 4.5 feet off the ground. And the reason for that is planning purposes, so that we can figure out what's there and how we can work around them.
It wouldn't make sense to turn on something in one room.
So we will kind of, and I would like to say that these next to the existing conditions through developing concept plan and MBI all happen concurrently, semi-concurrently. But once we get that existing condition study, that's when we want to do additional public outreach, because it would serve as a base map that we can speak with citizens and help highlight areas of concern that we want to consider when we move into the design plan. So that's that blue box there. So then once we receive that input, you develop a detailed concept plan. That goes into also with the mitigation banking instrument. So that's really that's the framework and the governing document for this bank. I mean, it includes your financial insurances. It includes all your monitoring provisions, your credit release schedules, your long-term steward, how the endowment is collected and then passed on to that long-term steward, so that once our 10-year monitoring maintenance period is done, there's additional funds in there if needed. So then that gets drafted, that gets an IRT review, and then it would go to eventually a final document. And I should point out that this is not a 1 month, 2 month, 3 month process. This is a year to a year and a half process. This is lengthy. These are large documents, lots of detail, and so this is not. I think one of the big points I want to point out is, bulldozers are not imminent. This is a long process that has a lot of steps left in it beyond where we are today. So then, once we get kind of through that MBI process and have that concept plan, that's where we, again, reach out and want to have additional citizen input and comment. Because the next step will be moving into more construction plans. So, once we have a concept layout, get comments, and then you can incorporate those comments into the construction documents. So what this this step says is we're going to separate it into 5 or 6 design reaches. So what we are proposing is over 30,000 linear feet of stream restoration. So these design reaches break it up into manageable sections that can be kind of phased. So it's, you wouldn't come in and construct all 30,000 feet at once. We do it in sections and move down through. And then those reaches are generally chosen based on kind of, length, constructable length, and then also stream size. So different inputs that would change the size of the stream and make it, so we want them the same for construction purposes, or generally the same for the contractor. And then once we develop those, kind of that first cut of design plans, we can then have another round of citizen input to revise them before they go on to local approvals. So once we get the prospectus approved and then onto the MBI, it still needs to go through Howard County approvals for grading plans, as well as erosion and sediment control plans. And it also needs to go to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and MDE for their joint permit application for wetland and waterways impacts. So there's still an additional permitting process on top of the banking approval process that we will have to go through with these final plans. And then it's only after that that we could go to construction, which is, at this point, several years down the road. And then once construction is complete, we enter into, a 10-year monitoring and maintenance period. And during that time, we have to monitor the stream. If there's any issues, we have to propose corrective actions and we have to fix them, and that is on our dime. So, that first 10 years is, even the first 2 years is when it's the most vulnerable. So, as you kind of progressively go through, you can see how the stream is responding and ensuring that it is stable. And then beyond that 10 years, the stream transitions to a long-term steward, which will be Columbia Association, and they would receive a percentage of the funds to fund that long-term monitoring and maintenance should anything need to be done. So that's kind of, where we are and what's to come briefly. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, just have a question about who do you have, you will solicit stakeholder input in several of the boxes.
Mm-hmm.
Could you define who you consider to be stakeholders?
The citizens of Columbia.
Okay, does the board fit into that? I guess we're citizens of Columbia.
So it's going to go out to everyone, and they'll be allowed to, we will hold meetings. It's not like, we're not just going to send the plans out. So we will post the plans online, but we will also plan to have a meeting that citizens can come to. We will present the plans. We will walk through why the current version, what the rationale and what we're proposing. And then, as citizens review them and provide comment, we will respond to them and adjust plans as and if necessary.
Okay, you don't see a separate presentation to the CA board? Okay.
Was that a yes or a no to that?
Next question. You said that you would set aside a certain percentage of the money for CA to do follow-up. Is that maintenance?
That's monitoring and maintenance.
Pardon me?
Monitoring and maintenance.
Okay, what about maintenance? If there are, like, what we're hearing before, that maintenance hasn't been done, there's a catastrophe over in Longfellow and all of that, 4 to 5 months. Who's going to do that? Your company, or who's going to be responsible for any problems?
The long-term steward will be responsible for that maintenance, but they can use that funds to hire somebody to, if they don't feel comfortable doing it themselves, like if it's more than just a tree removal, they could use those funds to hire somebody to come in and help them if it were to happen to be a larger scale fix.
But after the approval of the initial discussion, you guys have the first 10 years.
Yes, correct. So the
So
first
you-
10 years is us.
All right. And then
And then
after
after that's
that,
the long-term
it would be CA responsible for anything that happens and the cost. Is that what you're saying? I just want to be clear on
Yes.
what we're talking about.
Yes.
Okay, so the question for CA is, are they getting adequate money or not to do that? Okay, thank you.
Sherry.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that makes this difficult for everyone is that there's a lot of technical information that goes into this that most of us are not familiar with. And one of the things that I found a little confusing was about the private mitigation banks. It sounds as if it's a bank that is financing this, but that's not what I think it is. So could you explain, I know this has something to do with credits, could you explain what a private mitigation bank is and how it would be used for this?
Yeah, so let me step back a little bit. So as part of the Clean Water Act permitting process, when development occurs, in and around where we live, and that could be residential housing developments, it could be commercial developments, it could be roads, it could be schools, it could be airports, it could be railroads. So any sort of project that is going to then impact a waters of the U.S., which is streams or wetlands, if it's over a certain threshold, they would have to mitigate for it. So as part of their permit, it's a 3-step process. First, they have to try to avoid it to the maximum extent practicable. Then they have to minimize any impacts to the maximum extent practicable. And then if they can't avoid and minimize below this threshold, they have to provide mitigation. Okay? And there are several ways in which mitigation can be provided. The preferred method is mitigation banks. There's a second method that's called the in lieu fee fund, which the state collects the money and then would, essentially implement projects on their own. Maryland currently does not have a functioning in lieu fee program, so that's an option, not an option. And then the last method would be what's called permitting responsible mitigation. It's you, the developer, have a project, you have impacts you need to mitigate for it, you go out and you build your own mitigation. So the banking process is we do a large-scale restoration project, in this case, stream restoration, and we receive credit for that. And then when, let's say you're the developer, you have a mitigation need, then you would purchase those credits from us to satisfy your mitigation need. Does that hopefully get there?
Okay, so is CA purchasing?
No.
Who is purchasing?
Purchasing would be, you could have MDOT SHA for road projects. You could have Toll Brothers builds a housing development. Walmart comes in. It could be a wide range. It could be Howard County develops a school. So those are, it's the people that are impacting the environment with their project are the ones that purchase the mitigation credit.
Okay, so I guess the question I've been asked and what I wasn't able to answer clearly, so you'll help me with this,
That's fine.
is where is the money coming from? Who's providing the money and where is it coming from?
So Davie Mitigation provides the funds. So they make the upfront investment to do the project, and then once you hit milestones, you would then get credit releases that you can sell.
But where do they get the money?
We have cash. So it's, they're an investment, it's an investment group within our company, so they invest the millions of dollars into the project to get it up and running and going, and then as it hits success criteria and we're able to sell credits, that's how they get the return on their investment.
They get the money from these
credits,
Walmarts or whoever who buy the credits.
Maybe the schools, the roads, the
people who buy the credits.
Correct.
Does CA get any credits? Or all the credits go to Davie Mitigation?
No, the credits go to Davie Mitigation.
Bill.
Just tapping on two things that have been mentioned so far. I'm kind of understanding, I'm trying to make sure I got this correct on the mitigation bank here and the finalization, the state at which these plans or proposals have been. And help me if this analogy is correct. It's kind of like if I wanted to build a house and somebody said, we're going to build 3 or 4 bedrooms on that house, I'd say, well, I got to wait until I find out how much the loan is from the bank before I can figure out the extent at which I can build. So if we're waiting on the mitigation bank credits and how much those are, that will drive how much mitigation can be done along this stream. Is that correct? Because that's, you're waiting for MDE and the team to come back with the mitigation at this point based on the.
We're waiting for them to approve the bank.
Yeah.
And to say that, yes, this is viable. So they're currently looking at our crediting methodology, so how we came up with our number.
Right.
And that's one of the big answers that we have to come back with. And they're also in the process of changing their crediting methodology. A new one just came out yesterday. So that in and of itself is going to determine how many credits the bank can produce.
And the size of that credit is going to drive what could actually be done in this watershed.
It's going to drive the price.
Okay, yeah.
So yes.
And then getting back to this maintenance phase that we were talking about post stream restoration. Was this a feature of the project you did in Reston?
Yes.
And what kind of maintenance efforts have you had to undergo in some of these more mature areas over the last decade? Could you give us some examples of things that were done?
I mean, it's been generally very, very minor. So there's been some tree removal work when trees fall in, because we did did very limited tree clearing in certain areas of it, and in those areas where trees fell, we've had to come in and do it. We've had no real large-scale blowouts. We've had a few areas where we've had to come in and fix, areas of banks, but by and large, maintenance has been very minor. There's been some invasive species control, but
Could you just round numbers for the blowouts? What area are we talking about square footage for mitigation on those? Could you just give me a characterization?
for how long?
Yeah, well, what was the magnitude of that maintenance effort there? If you say minor, I don't have a good handle on what, I don't get.
So, I understand. I'm trying to, I don't want to misspeak.
Right.
So I will get back to you in more detail. But for example, would be we put in a stream structure and a rock became dislodged. So we'll do, in this bank, in this project, we used a lot of what's called like vane arms. So they're arms, made of rock or wood, and they deflect the water away from the bank to reduce stream bank erosion up and downstream. So there were some instances where, a rock became dislodged for some reason, and we would go in and we would fix the channel, and sometimes it was just putting the rock back. Maybe it wasn't placed perfectly, or it may have been, the channel was slightly off, so we had to do some bank grading up and downstream. But, you're talking about, 20 to, let's say, 100 feet out of 11 miles.
That's a great way to put it. Thank you. That helps.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Brian?
Yes. First of all, when you put this proposal into Army Corps of Engineers and MDE, and you got their response back, which seems extensive, with lots and lots of things they're concerned with, were you shocked about that? It just seemed a massive amount of work. And was this part of the delay in getting your feedback?
Their comments were extensive, but I don't think I was shocked by it, given the amount of citizen input. So I think, which I think is a good thing. I don't think that's a bad thing. But that has, one of the things I think more than that has kind of caused the delay is in there they want us to use the most recent stream crediting methodology, which we have been waiting for. There was a public noticed one in the summer, and now it's yet changed again to this one. So it's, I don't want to continually send people out to redo the methodology over and over again. So now that we've got this methodology, it's.
So when when you finally think you've got to where you can put go back to Army Corps of Engineers, will we get to see that before you go back to them? Will we get to see that document?
I would say it's going to be concurrent.
Concurrent at the same time, so we get it at the same time. Okay. One of the things that it points out in these documents, it points out something that you mentioned before, with the upland areas where the rain falls. And especially, there's 120 stormwater outfalls. How are you going to address this without addressing it in the watershed?
So you can size the stream based on the current hydrology, is what we do. So you look at.
So just to make it clear then, so you're not going to you're not going to actually mitigate any of this water. You're purely going to design the stream to take care of it.
Correct.
So it's going to be something like the river through Los Angeles, right?
No.
Okay.
It will not be like the concrete river through Los Angeles. I can say that with certainty.
Okay. Is this then why you chose this particular? You thought this was a particularly good project because it's a continuous one property owner, the CA. So you've got these easements, and it makes. Are you going to be doing anything at all in the watershed, in those streets? Any communications with the county or any of the entities? As Dennis said, it's hopeless. He threw his hands up. You can't do it. Do you agree with that? Do you agree you cannot do anything? Is there any money in here to go into the communities?
There is not credit given to watershed improvements.
So there's nothing going to be done where the rain falls. Is that correct?
Not with this project.
Not with this project.
I'm with
So
Dennis.
you're not going to. Okay, that's fine. That's all.
Okay, but I would like to say, just for the record, like I agree with Dennis. Like
you agree with.
I agree with watershed improvements. It would be good as well. But
no, he didn't say they would be good. He said it would not possible to do. That's what he said. Not possible.
Both.
Not a good plan. I've finished. Thank you.
Okay, Dick.
You can do one or two, but you can't do one.
I mean, they're
You've done some.
Okay. First of all, I'd like to thank whoever made these enlargements. I was afraid, looking at the other one, that I was going to have to get a new set of peepers to read it. But and in the future, when we ever have something this complex, I hope that we will blow it up. This has really been quite an education the last couple of years, hearing what everybody has to say about this project. I really wish I knew then what I know now. And particularly before we wrote the easement, I wish we put some more teeth in it. But we haven't, we have to move on from here. And I'm looking at the short term. What are we going to do over the next 2 years before this thing gets underway? We obviously need to work on our communication with the people who are nearby and in the neighborhood, and make sure that they feel that they are being heard, and that we make clear what we're planning to do. And again, this is a good time to really up our efforts on rain gardens and other retention features, and getting our neighbors involved in trying to help us on this thing before we start ripping the stream apart. And I think if we tell them this will help the project and maybe mitigate some of the mitigation, that might encourage them to take some proactive steps themselves. So I'd like to see some kind of planning, or at least a set of objectives as what we want to do over the next 2 years. And I think I assume we're making it very clear to you folks at WSSI as to our concerns. Obviously, the trees are a major concern. And there's been a lot of disappointment among people who are neighbors of projects in the past. So we don't want to find ourselves in that jam again. Also, Wes, you might want to be looking at that easement and see if there's anything in it that gives us some leverage in this process. I don't know that we have any, but you're a good lawyer. I think you could probably see some places where we can have more impact. But yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing the problem solved, because nobody wants to dredge that lake all the time. but it's going to be a complex problem, and I hope we do, and our residents get a good deal of input, and that you're working with them, because this could get real ugly.
Do you want to respond, or? Hey, Ginny?
No. I'd like to follow up on Sherry's line of questioning about mitigation. I assume your company, in looking at the potential for this project, has some idea of how many credits your company would get in the bank.
Yeah, it's in the prospectus, and I don't have the.
50,000, 100,000, $1 million?
No, it's down around like, it's in terms of what's called functional feet. And do not quote me on this because I did not come up with the exact, but it's around 13,000 functional feet.
That's the total?
That's the total. Correct.
So the last part of this question then, in terms of your example of Walmart's building someplace and they really should do some mitigation of some problems in God knows what state, okay? And instead of doing that, they can purchase from this bank and just get, they don't have to do the mitigation there. Is that correct? Is that the way it works? You didn't finish up on your discussion with Sherry.
So then with the mitigation, the impact and the purchase have to occur in the same watershed. In this case, it's the Patuxent watershed. So somebody in Western Maryland can't impact and then purchase from here, or somebody on the Eastern Shore can't impact and then purchase from here. So it has to be within what's called the USGS Hydrologic Unit Code. So within, in this case, again, it's the Patuxent River.
Okay, I didn't realize that.
You know, one of the reasons that banking is preferential is because you do these large, you go at these large scale ecosystems and do it on a large scale versus, you know, a Walmart may only need to restore, let's say 100, just to break it down, like 50 to 100 feet of stream, right? So then they do 100 feet here, you know, another Walmart does 100 feet here within larger problems. So they're not as robust of projects. And then when you look at it from a regulatory oversight standpoint, with each of these projects having 10 years of monitoring and maintenance, you know, MDE and the Corps and all that, like, there is there's a staffing issue. Like, they can't go around to 10,000 small mitigation projects around the state. Like, it would never get done, and you never, you know. So then banks kind of consolidate that into one ecologically meaningful project that can also be held to this higher standard.
Okay, thank you. So the impact is really on a certain area of Howard County. I didn't realize that. Thank you.
Bill?
Yep. I think it's Howard and then a lot of PG and all the way down to the
Well, if
bay.
you say the Patuxent, okay.
Yeah. But I just want to follow on what Ginny said, because from what I heard she said was that a large department store with big parking lot could go directly to mitigation. And I think what you said earlier was they first have to exercise avoidance, then minimization, and then only once they do those two steps, then they can go to mitigation. Is that correct?
Right, yeah, they have to prove that they've, you know, you can't, it doesn't give a developer or somebody carte blanche to go in and just pipe 1,000 feet of stream. Like,
right.
I've seen wetland permit applications where people propose that, and it's just like, it's dead on arrival. They need to show an effort to stay out of those resources. Like, that's the first step, is just don't impact them.
Yeah. And then just following up on the question of, or the issue of the responses or the questions that were provided by MDE and the team, 11 pages for this project. I know each project is unique. Clearly, the topography, the hydrology are all unique. But for a project of this size, where those number of questions, how would I benchmark that? Was that more than usual for a project this size, less, about the same, or?
No, I think it was a reasonable number of comments. I mean, it's over 30,000 linear feet of stream, so it's a large project. We are in a highly urban, suburban area. So there is a lot of interested party. There's a lot of eyes, like, you know, so I think, you know, and trees are an issue, resources are an issue. So I think there's going to be comments, and I don't think 11 pages was unreasonable. They want to, and sometimes, they give you that kind of initial nod, and then once you kind of get into the nuts and bolts, it's like, okay, well, explain this better, and that's to be expected.
Thank you. Sherry?
Yeah, I also, as far as the Maryland Department of the Environment response, that 11-page report, I just wanted to ask about the part that talks about limited biological restoration potential, talking about the actual, what's actually there in the watershed. And one of the things I was thinking about, and I don't know how you do this, but I was going to ask, are you working with experts in the wildlife area, and will you be working with them to also get some sort of what's the current existing situation and what might it be after this phase or that phase? Because we are facing with climate change an enormous drop in the number of birds, in the number of butterfly species. I mean, we're seeing a lot of biological change in these ecosystems that may or may not have anything to do with what we do with the stream. And I think we'd really need to know from some experts in that area what the effects could possibly be. I think there's a lot of a real concern and interest in this area about that. So how will you be handling that?
So to date, we have done some baseline benthic macroinvertebrates, so the bugs in the bottom of the stream, some baseline benthic macroinvertebrate studies, some baseline stream habitat studies. We've also done we had a fish survey done that used downstream of Elkhorn Dam, as well as then just upstream was Oakland Mills Road. Yep, Oakland Mills Road, and then working up. So we did kind of 3 to kind of show what the fish species were, because that's one of our goals is, to increase fish passage through roadway culverts and increase connection throughout. And then during construction, we're also going to be held to time of year restrictions based on the stream type, and that's so that you don't impact the reproductive cycles of the aquatic organisms, so they're taken into account there. And this is a use 1 stream, so there's no stream construction between roughly March-ish through the middle of June. So yeah, we are looking into those studies, but what that MDE comment relates to is our credit is based on a kind of a functional assessment, and it checks off certain levels of this stream functions period, and one of those levels is on biology. And given the highly impervious watershed condition, we don't anticipate that we're going to end up with, just for sake of hyperbole, we're not going to end up with a trout stream. We might get some. We're anticipating an increase in pollution-tolerant, bugs in the stream, as well as pollution-tolerant fish. So we do think we will see an increase, but we are not claiming that we are going to get like a robust biological rebound. I mean, there is not a robust biological population in the stream right now, and we don't expect to see that. We expect to see some improvement. And we didn't claim that we were in the prospectus, so we don't show a lot of biological uplift. We show it at levels dealing with stream bank erosion and stream chemistry and those items, riparian.
Okay, thank you.
Alan?
Okay, yeah, I got a bunch of questions and some comments. First of all, thank you, Dennis, for your introduction. I have absolutely no doubt, and I hope you know that, and you, John, know that I have no doubt in the care and concern that you two as human beings, as CA staff members, have for all those concerns that you mentioned. And I have no doubt you're working on this to improve and not to tear anything down. And Scott, I just met you, but from your presentation, I have no doubt that you got into this business to make things better for the environment, not to make things worse for the environment. And that said, the only thing I quote from this former president is trust but verify. It's an old Ronald Reagan quote. So I think that's part of our duty, is to not just say, okay, great, you all are good people, go do what it is you want to do, and we'll trust that everything will work out fine. So some of my questions are going to sound challenging and maybe even harsh. So let me start with maybe one of the harsh ones. I don't know any of the details, but I understand that WSSI is involved in a project, maybe more than one in Montgomery County, that there's some controversy about?
No, not in Montgomery County.
Not Montgomery? Okay. Then I'll let it go until I find out more about that. But what are you talk about when, you mentioned it's in the document, that when success criteria are met. Without getting too technical, if you know them, what are the success criteria? And if they're not already established, who gets to decide what the success criteria are?
So the success criteria are going to be determined by the IRT. So that's part of that as we go through the mitigation banking instrument process. They're speculating what they will do, but based on prior experience, it's going to be dealing with stream stability, so it's not eroding. It's going to be based on plant establishment, so that the trees we plant do survive. It's like about 450 stems per acre that need to survive. And actually, initially, it's on vegetative cover over the ground, and then it's on stems per acre. There will likely be something to do with invasive species cover associated with those projects, and I would say that those are going to be the main ones. Like, there's not erosion, the vegetation we plant comes back, and there's some sort of invasive species control within our project area.
And who decides what those success criteria ultimately are?
That's the IRT, so that's Core MDE, DNR, the group that I mentioned earlier.
Okay. You laid out, one of my questions was going to be, so where are the go, no-go points, and you laid out one that's already passed when the initial go-ahead by the IRT said, yeah, I think this is a project worth looking into. And then there are 3 go, no-go points by in terms of permitting locally. Are there any other go, no-go points, big ones or small ones, that are part of this process?
I mean, I think a big go, no-go point is going to be, as we respond to these comments, what the agency's response is. If they're not satisfied and they determine that, it doesn't yield enough credit to make it viable, then that could be a go, no-go point as well.
So we were told by CA staff that throughout the process, we being CA staff would have the ability to say, no, WSSI, you can't go in there, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit, and forgive me and let me know if I got this wrong. No, you can't go in there and take out those trees, so that to me sounds like ongoing go, no-go points, and I'm wondering, you didn't mention them.
So I would say that those are individual, I interpret that as comments along the plan. So, if we were to go forward with the 30,000 linear feet, when we are providing providing opportunity for comments, that's when it would come and be like, look, that's an area of trees that we just don't want touched. Like, don't stay out of that area. To me, that's not necessarily a go, no-go on the project. That's that's taking feedback from you as the property owner to step back.
Well, is that a comment that you can decide to take or not take, or is that a command that CA has the authority to give you as the project goes on?
I would say that it is honestly, in that case, it could be a command. But, I treat it as a comment. I think this is kind of a team effort. You guys, we were vetted and hired. So, at this point, I would take it as a comment, and we would respond to it. I'll let you. Okay, thanks.
Did you want to add to that, Dennis?
I would say that that certainly John and I see our job as to trust and verify also. So I know that's your job as well. But that we are going to be intimately involved in the plan, and we are going to look at every tree that is removed and every piece of it and vet it. And just like you want to do the same thing, we're going to do that
on a daily basis.
Live it every day.
And you used the word again, so I want to give you a chance. In your initial opening comments, one of the things you said was, we came to you 2 years ago with a plan. And we keep hearing there is no plan, there's just a prospectus, so I wanted to give you a chance to let us.
So I would say the plan is to improve the stream through the stream restoration process. There's not a drawing, but there is a plan.
Got it. I that's what I thought, but I just wanted to make sure, I wanted to give you a chance to speak to that. Who's going to decide, and what is this percentage, and how, and I guess since we don't know what the total dollars are, we can't know how much it will be, but who decides this? You talked about percentage of funds will be available to CA for us to sort of take over afterwards. How do that could be huge, or it could be zero, or anything in between.
So it depends on the, is it a percent of the?
So we have agreed upon percentage.
Yes.
I didn't hear, I saw that you were discussing with each other, I didn't hear.
We have an agreed upon percentage in the contract.
Which is?
I'd have to look that up.
Yeah, I don't remember either. We can get back to you on that.
Okay, and that's a percentage of, like, the gross amount of the total mitigation effort, or some?
Percentage of the credit sale.
Credits. I did, thank you for that. I didn't, and let me just make sure I'm understanding. My understanding is, from what you said, is that after 10 years, we get the percentage, and then you all, not that you're bad people to do this, you all have washed your hands of it. You all have nothing to do with it. Like, we bought the car, and if engine fails the next day, that's on us, not on you. Is that an accurate way to describe it?
I think it's a little harsh, but
Yeah.
Then you take over ownership of the project at that stage, but it's
Yeah.
been through that kind of, you've got, the good thing about that is you don't just walk off the lot, you get the 10 years of.
We've had 10 years of a warranty.
You know,
contract.
10-year
and the
warranty.
way I like
I
to,
get that.
For 100,000 miles.
At the end of 10 years,
Right.
the project is considered by the regulatory agencies as a mature project. And the regulatory obligation to maintain it, except for what's stated in the easements, the encroachment, border boundaries, and things of that nature, really goes away. And it's our decision on what we maintain, and the funds kind of dictate that.
As we do with other streams and things that we own, sure. I didn't catch your answer to Ginny's question way early on. Is it either your plans, or are you willing to make separate presentations to the CA board in some of those blue boxes?
if it was requested, yes, we would work with you on that.
Thanks. It has been claimed by some in the community that the techniques, certainly that were used in our Longfellow, and I know that was not your doing, but also being looked at for the Lake Elkhorn stream restoration, are better suited for streams out west and sort of different conditions than we find here, and or are sort of using old technology that has been superseded by better ideas. How do you respond to that?
I would say that they're not, we evolve our techniques based on, what we learn from other projects. There is an evolution to it. In some cases it's less rock. It's how we plant our trees. We've made adjustments to streamside planting. We learn on our designs, but that these techniques are better suited for out west, I would disagree with that. I mean, we are successfully used them on, tens of miles, 50, miles of stream that I would consider, successful. So, no, I would not agree with that statement that these are subject to out west.
Okay. I have some questions for CA staff, but I want to I know you had some questions, and we have limited time with you.
Yeah, so we've got about 5 minutes left, so I'll ask a couple final questions. So obviously the economic success sort of hinges on the value of the credits and being able to sell those credits to other entities. So the question I have is, have any entities approached you with interest in buying those credits? And if so, which entities have expressed interest in purchasing credits?
Not yet, because it's too early in the process. So it's not really, when people generally approach you for purchasing credits, they have that immediate need, and there is no immediate credit availability with this bank. We got a ways to go before we can sell.
And my second question is, there's been a lot of, I'm not going to say confusion, but sort of disagreements on number of trees being cut down, whether it's a lot of trees or a very narrow band of trees. And so the question I have is, when would we know what the plan is for which trees or how many trees are going to be cut down, and how can CA influence that?
So you'll get a better idea after we do, the specific tree study. So once we have, the trees within the stream valley there, and once we start to get, that concept plan will be sized. There'll be cross sections, so we'll be able to start to add a plan for them to see where we need the stream to go. That's the time that we can start providing specific tree removal estimates, as well as soliciting comments of like, why does that need to happen there? Could you do this instead? And looking at alternative designs.
Because I think that's one of the main concerns from a lot of residents is making sure that we don't cut down so many trees that we alter the ecosystem significantly.
Different things that we've heard that I can say is the entire easement area does not get cleared, and even a consistent entire swath down along the stream valley will not be cleared. So it will be a much more nuanced clearing than that.
Okay, thanks.
Can I ask one last question?
Okay, one last question.
Is there you were here for all the public comment you just heard, and you've heard other, is there anything else you'd like to respond to any of the comments or questions or characterizations that were made?
No, at this time, I think we'll let the comments stand, and we will respond as part of this process that we're currently in.
Sherry?
Yeah, just one final question. So you talked about the success markers, just to make sure that I understand this, around stream stability, plant establishment, and invasive species control. Will this project improve water quality issues in Lake Elkhorn? And that's because of a recent situation as far as algae is concerned. So will that be one of the markers going forward? Is that going to be an emphasis here?
That will likely not be one of the success criteria as part of the IRT. It will be more of an indirect measure based on stream bank erosion within the restored stream. We can make educated assumptions that phosphorus levels will be reduced in the lake. We're currently reviewing those reports that Mr. Bannister referenced. And just speaking here now, like one of the reasons phosphorus increases after rainstorm is it binds to the sediments in the stream. You get stream bank erosion, it erosion downstream and ends up in the lake. So there will be some reduction, but this project will also have no control over what people put on their lawns or some of the other potential sources of that.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's one complicating factor with the lakes. There is a certain amount of phosphorus cycling inside the lake, not fresh inputs, but we have plant growth, plants die, phosphorus is there, gets put back up into the water column, and that could be 40% of what we're seeing maybe. So we have some cycling issues in Elkhorn that would not be affected by this.
Okay, just to make sure that people understand that in relation to the whole system and how the system is working. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Did you have a final comment?
Yeah, I did have one comment that I think needs to be addressed just to kind of reassure everyone. Ms. Baker made the comment that we proposed another bank as kind of an end run around addressing this. So we did propose an additional bank in a different part of the state. However, it cannot be an end run on this project. This project cannot move forward without addressing these comments and going through this process. There is no end run around it. Without going through this process, it can't happen, regardless of if we are proposing a bank somewhere else. So I just want to reassure everybody that there is no end run going on, and we will have to address everything. So.
Thank you. That concludes the time for this session. I'd like to thank everyone, both of you, for attending, and I look forward to hopefully inviting you back again when we later on throughout the process. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Can I have a sort of procedural question about where we're going to go with this project? As this is a work session, are we planning to readdress some of these? I've got a lot more questions. No, are we going to put this on the next agenda?
So I don't believe this is on the next agenda, but there's certainly stuff.
What about an opportunity to talk to staff? I mean, we got issues related to stream restoration guidelines and recommendations that are policies that we haven't addressed, and we got policies related to the Columbia.
So what I'd recommend is compiling a list of questions that we can eventually present to staff and have that dialogue. That's what I'd recommend.
I'll have dialogue with staff?
No. Let's compile a list of questions, send them to me, and then we can address those with staff.
But we're not going to have a home discussion on that.
Well, it's not scheduled.
It's not scheduled yet. Not right now.
It's not part of this watershed.
It's not part of. Well, this session is done and is not scheduled for the next meeting. The next we have the overview of the villages and the FY22 financial results.
And I have the good fortune to be up again.
You again.
Yes. So tonight, on the agenda tonight, we're going to talk about governance and structure as well as financial data. I'm going to cover the structure, and Jackie's going to cover the financial data. The structure, they are separate residential community associations, which are independent, incorporated nonprofit associations. They are formed to promote the common good and welfare of the residents and property owners of each village. They have unique articles of incorporation, bylaws, and covenants, and they have a community-elected board of directors. In terms of village operations, they're fully funded. Their mission is to enforce the covenants, to foster a sense of community in terms of events, oversee the village elections, and to provide support to the board of directors. In terms of building management, there are 24 buildings in the inventory. They generate revenue through leasing the space to commercial, religious, and social and civic organizations, and they offer space at reduced rates to civic group and residents. There is an annual charge that is granted to each of the villages. The employer portion of so these are things that CA provides. We provide the employer portion of the village employee benefits, the real estate taxes for each of those 24 buildings, as well as the building insurance, the legal fees for covenant enforcement and employment of a covenant advisor, the capital improvements to the buildings and the neighborhood center buildings, the maintenance and repairs of the buildings to the extent that they fall within the management guidelines, which in some cases is $1,000 and in other cases is $2,000, and some administrative and marketing services. So what's interesting, I feel like we interact with the villages. My department interacts with them all the time. So we do the maintenance of the grounds, and that means that we're on site every week, pretty much of the year. Some more than others, or if there's a wedding or a special event of some kind in the area between the other barn and the teen center or at Oakland Manor, we're on site and we're helping out and setting things up. We take care of snow, trash, and debris removal, which is an ongoing, constant job. And I think if you guys have been to all your buildings, I think they look terrific, and I hope you feel the same way as well. And we also provide a lot of special event support, and that's everything from a fair to painting one of our trucks for the July 4th parade. and getting a bench and everything else that goes with it. So we are a big part of all the special events that take place within the facilities. The management contract is the building use agreements between CA and each village, which outlines responsibilities of each party. The current management contract has a 6-year term, which is FY19 through FY24. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my able assistant, Jack.
Thank you. Hey, everyone. As far as the annual charge share, that is, there was an allocation to each village that's based on board-approved methodology that has been in place since FY19. So Dennis talked through the types of funding and support that are provided by the Columbia Association, and what this demonstrates, the pie here is CA's annual charge revenue in total for FY22. And the piece of the pie collectively with the things that Dennis was talking about, except for the in-kind support that he spoke to, the slide with the pictures, in FY22 was this 6.5 million, or 14% of the pie. And again, the pie total annual charge revenue includes commercial as well as residential in this example. So this is also, I wanted to mention and reiterate that this is support for not just the villages, but the 24 buildings that are managed by the villages. So, and excluding the in-kind support. And then here is a 10-year history of that amount. So you can see the 6.5 million in FY22 and just kind of the pattern throughout the last 10 years and looking ahead to, where we are now in FY23. And, looking at this, I think there are two key takeaways. One is that CA's commitment is evident as far as, support of the villages. And that another thing is that it really held consistent over the kind of the COVID years. You see a little bit of a dip, but it's really not that much. There's more of a little bit above the norm in FY19. So those are just two takeaways that I felt that there were regarding this particular 10-year look back. So with that, and there's a lot here, and I'll just talk about a couple things briefly. I think it's important to talk about, to mention just the impact of COVID on this funding arrangement. So in, FY20, there were amendments that were board approved at the end of that year when COVID was kind of hitting in the last 6 weeks of the fiscal year, that 5 villages chose to sign that allowed them to not repay any excess cash. So this is cash reserves. There's a calculation that, and then anything beyond that comes back to CA. So 5 villages chose to accept that amendment and not repay that amount. Then in FY21 and in 22, there were board-approved resolutions to, again, have all 10 villages retain additional amounts of excess cash beyond the calculation that is in the management contract. As far as the annual charge share that went to the villages, they really, at the end of the day, did not decline very minimally. So, FY21 looked rough initially with, everyone tightening their belts and some decreases in that amount, but then there were payments made to the villages at the end of that year and also at the end of FY22. Looking ahead, we're unbelievably about halfway through FY23, and we've got an increase in the annual charge share of about 5% over last year's budget, and then a return to kind of normal capital and operating funding by CA. So there's a few things going on here, and I'll talk about a couple of them. So what we just talked about were some of the, board-approved exemptions from excess cash. This is interesting. So this shows that impact. The blue line is, over the last 3 years, what would have been repaid to CA had there been no amendments or resolutions. And then the orange path is what was actually repaid to CA. And another amendment was that in these 2 years, FY21 and 22, anything that is being returned to CA is used in the respective villages for environmental projects. The bar chart below that looks at the villages in total, their cash position over the last 4 years. I will say that for both of these, there are attachments at the end of the backup for you that breaks all of this down by village. Should you be so interested to dig into that detail, we certainly won't tonight. But you can see a gradual increase, and we are at the end of FY22. The villages have in total cash and total cash reserves at unprecedented levels. So they have steadily increased, and looked back, prior 5 years and certainly beyond that, they are at their highest. So that, from a mechanics standpoint, is the result of the things we talked about on the last slide. Funding staying fairly consistent, and then exemptions to the cash reserves beyond, what was in the management contract. So that's where we are. There's a few other metrics here, and again, the details behind it. One thing that this top one just talks about, so how much in total village-generated revenue is there as a percentage of total revenue, and on average for all villages, that is 38%. And you can see that the range is pretty significant, 16 to 59%. So individually, among the different villages, there's a wide range. Yes?
Was that a mean or a median?
It's a mean.
Thank you.
Yes. This one I just wanted to talk about for a minute, working capital, which is current assets divided by current liabilities. So I want to just talk about that for a minute. So that's a financial metric that looks at operating liquidity. And what it's really saying is, does an organization have readily available the means to pay any obligations that it has over the next 12 months? And so ideally, what you want in an organization is a ratio there of at least 1.0. So you're saying, okay, I have cash and some receivables of things that are coming in, and that could cover if I didn't have any more funding, any more revenue coming in, that could cover what I need to pay, what my obligations are for the next year. So with that, the average, the mean, is 1.8 for all of the villages, and there's a wide range there as well, 1.6 to 2.7. So the reason that I was going to say that it's interesting is that if you look at all of the villages' cash, I'm going to use Dorsey as an example. So Dorsey Search, compared to all the other villages, has by far the least amount of cash at the end of the fiscal year 22. But they also have fewer obligations. So their working capital is actually the highest. It's this 2.7. So, you need to look at everything, obviously. And
I do have one question. For perspective, what's CA's working capital?
So CA's working capital is 1.1.
Okay.
And you have to obviously be cautious to compare the villages to CA because it's apples and oranges. So 1.1, what that speaks to is that we then take that cash and we have to spend it, right? We have a lot to do with that money to, maintain our facilities and operate and all of that. But yet we are over that 1.0 ratio, and that 1.1 does include our emergency reserves.
And you've assured yourself that Dorsey's cash isn't hiding under Dick's mattress or anything like that?
Well, that'd be a lot higher than 2.7.
No comment. And then there are a a couple other, ratios here that you can look at, and again, the breakdown of cash and what that means in perspective to number of expenses that they have, and it's broken down by village, so.
All right. This reminds me a little bit of like what I get when I go get blood work done, and I get, this is where your test went, and this is the normal range, and this is the high. Are any of, you gave us some ranges. Are any of the villages in, and you said they're all above 1.0 in the second one, but are any of them in any of those measures in the orange or yellow or red zone anywhere?
So in my opinion, that
Yeah.
would be a no, but, this is informational and certainly things that you should talk to your villages about. And it's interesting to also to see the comparability, as far as the number of months expenses that the number of months of expense that should be on hand with cash. The answer isn't 3 to 6 months. It's that it depends. It depends on the stability of the revenue sources coming in. It depends on what would your exposure be as a village versus CA? Again, apples to oranges, if there was an adverse or unexpected event and something slowed down or a bridge falls apart or whatever, who is that on? And that's what can determine should it be higher or should it be lower. So I would say no, but I don't know. I know their operations, but I don't know what they're planning in the next year, for example.
I think Bill has a question also. Bill?
Jackie, I'm enjoying this so far. This is great. I'm thinking that, seeing as we're in the middle of budget season right now, could you put together some of these metrics for the Columbia Association for this group as part of our budget discussion? Because it would be separate, we wouldn't be comparing, but I think these would be great things to know going into the next budget year.
The only ones that really apply here are working capital and then how many months' worth of expenses there are in hand.
Sure.
So, and yes,
Yeah, the
I
first one
have
does make
those.
sense. I agree with you. But the last three, I think, would be good to know.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, the working capital is 1.1.
Right, yeah.
So you just need 2 more.
One down.
So I'll finish up with just a couple quick more graphs that I found interesting. So this looks at building generated revenue. So the leases, the rental revenue from, leasing out the buildings per square foot per village. So you can see, again, there's a wide range, and I'm certainly not going to draw any conclusions from this because there are a number of variables that could be impacting why it's, approaching the mid-20s for one village and down at $8 per square foot in another. Some of those are the rates that they're charging, just the demand for the space. And as they're each coming out of COVID, they each have had their own path to what is a new normal with respect to their operating hours and what's available.
Also, square footage plays a big role. I mean, if you have very few square feet, you're going to have more dollars per square foot.
Well, no, that's
potentially.
normalized to square feet,
It's
right?
exactly.
Yeah,
it's
but if you
normalized to-
but if you don't have that many square feet and you're charging the same amount as someone else who does, so if you got 500 square feet charging $5 and someone else has got 700 square feet charging $5, that you're going to get differences there potentially.
Yeah, the rates, it all factors in, and but interesting nonetheless. And then finally, so this looks at each village, and again, looking at that building generated revenue coming from leasing the space, what was the delta, how did it compare this past year to pre-COVID, to FY19? So using Dorsey as an example, only because they're first alphabetically and always first in my list of villages, they were essentially the same. So what they generated from the building was in FY19 pre-COVID was nearly identical to how it was this most previous year. And then Hickory Ridge, if we move a couple over, you can see that they, generated significantly less revenue. So I will just comment again here that contributing factors can include the rates, the same types of things, their operating hours at this time, and the demand for that space. So the good news is that for those who have not kind of I don't know if you want to call it recovered, or if their new normal is not quite what it was to before, the expenses associated with not bringing in that revenue are very variable. So they don't own the building and have a huge amount of depreciation to incur, even though they're not renting it out, and they're not paying rent. So, they can manage their expenses to that revenue, similar to, some of what CA's had to do on a large scale over the last couple of years. So that is all that I have, and what I am hoping is that, it helps you to understand, how this portion of the total annual charge revenue is being invested in the community.
Thank you. Dick?
Yeah, if you want to know where all that money's going, we have a village manager who's done an incredible job of fixing up Linden Hall. And if anybody's planning an event, do stop by and take a look at it. It's a beautiful space. And another thing, every village meeting I go to, I always ask, how CA is treating them and what's been going on. And I always get really incredible responses, and it's the way your people have been so attentive to the needs of the village. And I appreciate it.
Okay.
Judy?
Yeah. Dennis, I just want to thank you and your staff. You said you do a lot of work for the community, and Oakland Mills Festival last Saturday, we couldn't hold it outside, but yet the Yards Alive group that gave away 1,000 plants had to have it outside because they couldn't fit us in the auditorium, in the barn. And you guys came through with tents, cones, everything, and you just fantastic. So thank you so much.
Sherry?
Yeah, Jackie, I just want to thank you and the financial staff for the support that you've given to the villages. I think the last couple of years were really tough. Everyone was very nervous and anxious about how we were going to get through this period. I think there was a lot of cooperation and a lot of understanding. This is very reassuring to see. And I think it speaks to the best of the communication between the villages and CA. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Jackie, thank you for this. I'm just sort of trying to understand this financial thing. And I know at one board meeting recently, we had someone come in and present about the way villages are financed differently, and they've all got different numbers per capita. So I don't necessarily want you to answer it now, but maybe you could explain how that, can I go to somewhere where I can see how that is worked out, how people, each village has different amounts?
I can send you a recap of the methodology.
Okay, thank you.
There's a board-approved amount in total, and then there's a methodology as to how it's allocated.
Okay.
And it's pretty precise, so yes, I can.
Yeah, because evidently everybody's been told that Hickory Ridge is low on the totem pole, so to speak. So, so it'd be good to have a nice explanation when I go back to the next board meeting.
I think it'll be helpful. Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks. Any further questions? Alan?
Yeah, Jackie, this is maybe such a simple question. It goes without saying, but I just want to make sure I'm understanding. One of your first slides was the pie chart, said that out of the total amount that CA takes in annual charge, about 14%, I think you said, goes to villages. So could we assume that if, through whatever series of decisions, the villages all decide to do their own charging of residents for their own income, that we could just reduce our annual assessment total amount by 14% and CA could continue on?
No, I mean, a lot of it has to do with the buildings. What would happen with the buildings and who would absorb that cost. So it wouldn't just be the annual charge. As you know, that 6.5 million right there is double what the annual charge share is. So it would depend on what happens with all of those other items.
Okay, thank you.
So.
Any further comments, questions? Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. Next, we have the ethics policy. So right now I've got in the packet, looks like 3 separate policies. So the way I'll handle this is I'll let Wes begin to basically describe the first policy and how this is structured.
Thank you. So first, I'm just going to recap briefly where we've been and where we are. I'm just going to give a summary because the details are in the memos. But I think it makes sense to do this because I believe 4 board members weren't here when this process started. So this process did start in February of this year. I drafted a revision of the ethics policy in coordination with audit, HR, input from the president, based on legal requirements, HR requirements, insurance requirements, and best practices, obviously. And that was submitted to the board, that draft, in March of this year. The board, at that time, discussed the ethics policies at those April meetings. I believe progress was being made. Comments were submitted by the board. I incorporated those comments into the draft policies at that time. At the April 28th meeting, that was a consolidated effort, and that did include comments, or some of the comments from the board that I incorporated into the policies. And at that April 28th board meeting, a motion was made to vote on the draft revised ethics policies at that time, but that motion failed. Then there was a period of time when there was no action on the ethics policy, and that's when this board came into the picture. On June 9th, a subcommittee was created to draft the ethics policies. On July 13th, Mr. Bolton submitted a draft document entitled the Columbia Association Board of Directors Ethics Code. That's in the packet. So the first packet is the one draft that's a staff provided, i.e. myself. The other one is that document that Dick submitted on July 13th.
And there's also an August 8th.
Yep, I'm getting there. On August 4th, Mr. Bolton submitted a draft document entitled Board of Directors Ethics Code Enforcement Policy, submitted it to me for review. On August 8th, Andy Stack, Mr. Stack, submitted a draft document entitled Reporting and Handling Ethics Complaints. He submitted that to myself. I believe all these were submitted to the board as well. Is that accurate? Yes.
We got all in front of me,
So now I'm just stating facts. It's unclear to me if one person worked on these documents or if it was a consolidated effort of multiple individuals from the board. And as of now, I haven't received any commentary from the board that there's any consensus concerning the content of those documents that have been submitted by those individuals. I'm just saying that. So that's where I am in my process. On October 6th, so I did review those documents. And my comments about those documents as they compare to the document that I submitted, those are included in the memo in detail. On October 6th, Mr. Bolton resubmitted his 2 draft documents that he submitted on July 13th and August 4th. There were changes to those documents. So now there, to your point, are several documents here that are before the board. So that's where we stand as far as what has occurred from February to now. So when I'm looking at these documents that have been submitted, and obviously the document that I drafted in coordination with senior leadership, I'm looking at several criteria. I mean, there's a lot that goes into this, right? But just to name a few, for example, conflict of interest, fiduciary duties, the investigation procedure. And when I'm looking at the documents submitted, there were several differences between what I submitted and what was submitted by the board. And specifically, if we're talking about conflicts of interest, I don't think that there was adequate language surrounding how to deal with conflicts of interest. I thought there was inadequate information provided concerning how to properly conduct an investigation from beginning to end. It didn't provide details for properly handling the report of the investigation and corrective actions, how to properly implement that. And the reason I'm saying inadequate is there was gaps there. There was a lot of stuff in the one that myself and staff presented, and there were clear. There were terms that were left out of the one submitted by the board subcommittee that I think truly need to be addressed. Because if those matters aren't adequately handled in the ethics policy, then that ethics policy will not be a sound document, especially for a corporation of this magnitude. So with that being said, I mean, we've got these several documents that are before the board. I think that the best approach was the one that we were doing back in April, which was we were using staff's document as the base document, and then we were receiving comments from the board that could be incorporated into that document. Now, the best way to do that, instead of getting just random shots from the board at what each individual thinks, is for the board to reach a consensus. Hey, these are for you to read through it, determine what changes that you think need to be made, discuss it amongst yourselves, bring it to me so I can review it and vet it through the legal lens, and then incorporate it appropriately. So that's where we are now.
So I do have one question. So it's not like we've been operating without an ethics document. We've obviously have the original
current documents.
We have the current ethics document. So the question I have, and this process started back in April, or even beforehand, February.
April of which year?
It's been a while. I'll put it at that. So the question I have is, what was the original impetus for making adjustments to the ethics policy? What's our primary goal in making adjustments at this point? What's the reason why we need to change now?
Well, it's when I started initially. One of the first things this board told me was that they wanted the ethics policies to be updated. They hadn't been updated in quite some time. At that time, and it's been several years for each of the 4 ethics policies, and I certainly agreed with that. And another issue is that your ethics policies shouldn't be 4 documents; they should be consolidated, which is what I did. Streamlined it, and then added additional details that a proper ethics policy requires. As we were going through this process in March. Or I'm sorry, in April, when it was before the board, we were doing that. The board, as you remember, because you were here,
Sure.
we presented it. The board, at the time, as I think it could have been done a little bit differently, but, I'd come to the board meeting, board members would say, hey, I think we should change this, I think we should change that, and I'd actually incorporated them into the document. The April 28th document was looking pretty solid, which is why we suggested voting on that as to be our current ethics policy. But it, as I said, it failed. So, but right now we have several documents that have now been entered into the mix, which complicates the matter. So I really do think it's best if we get re-centralized, bring it back to that base document that staff produced, and we can get back to then, hey, board, what changes do you think you want to make to it? Get some consensus, provide it to myself and staff for review, and we can incorporate them accordingly, give it back to you, and get through this process.
Okay. I'll next allow Andy to speak on what he submitted, because you submitted your own document. So I'll give you a couple minutes to just add some comments on how you came up with this, the document you've presented in the packet, and what are the key differences between what you have and what's in Wes's original.
I'm not sure that there are a whole lot of differences between what Wes actually submitted and what I submitted. I had pulled out the basically how you handle violations documents, and said, I think what we need, because of discussions we've had over the past several months, is we need better explanation of how it works, which is why I put a flow chart in. We need better definition of some of the terms so that we understand, everybody understands what the terms are. And so I would say that that's where my version of the document came from.
So if there's no material differences between what you have and what Wes has, would it make sense just to go, drop basically what you have and basically consider what you have as the same as what Wes has?
Because he added, there are some things
there are
that he added that are, I mean, that there are differences.
Okay, so what are the key, in that case, what are the key differences?
Right, good, because I really think we need some definitions put in to that document so that when a future board looks at it, we understand what those terms are. And I think also we do need a flow chart that explains how the process works. And so I think we just need that type of information in as to what it actually looks like. And that is, but I think we need those types of things added into the document.
Yeah, I think definitely when we use terms, we should always define what those terms are. So I think it's always a good thing to do to have a section of these are the terms, these are the definitions of those terms, just to make sure there's no conflicts. But I don't see why that requires a whole new document. I mean, you could just have a section of terms in Wes's document. You could have a flowchart in Wes's document. So just trying to do some consolidation.
For Wes, which is why Wes produced his document, and I would not feel comfortable if I kind of modified his document without.
I wasn't saying modified, but suggest.
Yeah.
So, okay, and the last document we have is from Dick, which I believe is a bit different.
Yes, it is. I'm not going to rehash the whole history of this, but it goes back several years. And I'm delighted that we are finally addressing this problem, because the old original documents that we had were really a mess. And I thought they needed to be reformatted, among other things. And one of the things I did was to make this simply a board document. We have policies for staff that are fine, but the board's an unusual situation. And one of the problems with our our current document is that it mixes up the board and the senior staff and regular staff, and it just makes it a lot more confusing. Plus, it's, almost 28 pages long. And what I wanted to do is to have something that was a little simpler, that was easier to read, that was better organized. So what I was trying to do here was not so much change policies, but as to change format, and to make the format a little more understandable so that people have a nice, and one of the things I did is I separated the code itself and the enforcement mechanism. That's why there are two documents for me. And the first document is something that Andy and I worked on together. That's the code itself. And the second document, I had written a version of it, and Andy wrote his version of it. And we did not, because of various conflicting vacations and whatnot, have a chance to really merge the two. The structure I was looking for was, I wanted a code, that wasn't all mixed in with policies and procedures and everything, but something that just told board members what their responsibilities were, what restrictions there were, and the basics. So you could pick it up. The document I wrote, I think, is 8 pages long. Actually, it's 7 and a smidgen. But anyway, and there's a logical structure to it. Instead of lots of things picked from here and there, it starts off with a brief introduction. And in fact, it starts out with a quote from Leakey. Then it gets into what the board's responsibilities are, and they're all outlined. And then what restrictions there are on board behavior or activities. There's a section on civility, which is really just what it says. There's a section on conflicts of interest. And then there's some specifics of business conduct, like not winning CA contests and things like that, some specifics. but it seemed like the logical way to do things. Everything that was in Wes's document is in this, except stuff that's not relevant to the board. And I tried to write it in conversational English. My problem with Wes's document is, and I think he did a lot of good work there. I think he really did clean it up quite a bit. I wish that we had before he started working on this thing, an opportunity for the board to discuss what their problems were with the old document and the chance to find out just what the legal requirements were for a document like this, and also to find out what best practices is. And we didn't have that, and Wes went ahead without that kind of guidance, and that's why I felt it was necessary to put together something a little simpler. The main difference between what I put together, what Andy and I put together, and the enforcement policy is I have focused on a few other things. I wanted to get into the specifics of who votes and participants, some things that we have run into some problems with in the past. I wanted to make sure there was due process. The old policy kind of did not assume people were innocent until proven guilty, which I thought was a problem. The use of an outside attorney is something that needed to be addressed. Time limits on how long this thing goes. We've had issues that took 4 months, 5 months to resolve that really should have been resolved a lot quicker. And some other changes in there. So where the real changes are in the enforcement policy, and that's where you'll find that Andy's version and my version are different. Where we go from here is, I think the first question is, which format does the board like? And then I think if they feel that the format that I put together is a cleaner, easier to follow format, then we can go in and look at specifics. Now, the procedure we had in the past is we took Wes's document and then went over it line by line, and that was not a successful way to go because you start messing with a line in one piece of it, and it affects lines in other pieces of it. You have to look at these documents holistically. And you can't, and there's a lot of wordsmithing that needs to be done, which is not something that 10 people need to work on together. So I'm hoping that people will look over all of these and decide what format they want, and we can take it from there.
So I do need to address one comment. There are, on page 2 of that first memo is the list of the differences between the terms that address board topics, the difference between mine and the differences between the Board of Directors Code of Conduct, and there are significant differences between mine and the one that was submitted. So I do want to just state that for the record. There's a lot of differences there, a lot of omissions that were there, and I lay them out in specific detail. So, but I just want to draw that.
Well, what you did, and I did look that over. And I certainly could. Let me go over my draft and see if there are things that need to be addressed. The one thing that's different that I think is something the board should discuss is we do have the duties, the duties of obedience, the duties of loyalty, the duties of care. And instead of putting them in all by themselves, since I worked all the content of that into the actual document without specifically mentioning the duties because I was looking for the flow there, and the duties tended to be stuff that would be scattered all through the document. If there's a feeling that a need is to put in the specific duties, it'll add a page, but it can be done. And I'm open to edits. I'm hoping everybody's taking a chance to read this and give us some feedback. And I'd like to if I get some good feedback, maybe put together another draft for the next meeting.
So I do have one clarification. So this document you have only applies to the board.
Only the board.
So this is not a complete policy because you still need a policy that applies to the
We
rest
have
of the
a policy
organization.
that applies to staff.
So
It's a regular HR thing. It's
well,
a-
yeah, we got this. Well, we got the original policy.
Yeah, the
and-
original policy, and I think the original policy can be cleaned up, but that's not really what my focus was on. My focus was on having something specific to the board that was straightforward, concise, and easy to understand.
Yeah, I guess my point is if we voted on this, we would still have to vote on the rest of the policy updates because the rest of the policy would probably need to be updated also.
Which put us back into that system of having. I thought that when I got here, the
And then we're
board
getting- and then
did
we're
not
back
want
to-
multiple. Yeah, they did not want multiple policies. You can still address the board in one document. That's why I broke it into subsections and had a table of contents so you could easily see what applies to the board. You can easily see what applies.
But that's definitely a distinction that's important is what applies to each part of the organization, what applies to the board, what applies to staff.
Everything applies to the board.
Yes. So you can.
Well, everything in the document applies to the board. So if you carve out only the section that's layered on to the board and say this is all that will apply to the board, then you're leaving out a lot. I know, Dick, you're saying that those are things that don't apply because it's more employee related, but that's really not the case. It's the whole thing in totality. So I have a comment generally about this process, but I don't want, there are other people that put their hands up.
So I think I'll just go around because I think pretty much everyone has their hand up. So I'll start with Ginny and I'll go around.
Yeah. Just a quick question, and it's actually for Andy and Wes, based on Dick's draft. He's saying the board will then vote on whether to accept the findings and recommendations by secret ballot. I don't think you guys have secret ballot in yours, correct?
So I didn't think this today was we were going to be going through
No,
line by line.
just two quick questions. Do you have an opinion on whether it should or should not be secret ballot? Just off the top.
Yeah, I do, but I mean, is that what we're going to be doing right now? I mean, if we're going to do this,
Okay,
we would do it systematically, not just.
Yeah, so
We want to get into that.
Yeah, I don't think
Well,
we're
the other quick question is, I think Dick has a role for the vice chair. This is not self-interest here, guys. And I don't believe you do, in terms of if there's complaints against the chair, it's to be directed to the board vice chair for consideration by the full board. I don't believe.
Which is my point, that we need to go back to having this type of robust conversation and get. Yes, I understand, and there's stuff that are not in his, that are in mine.
So the issue here is as much as we have 3 different authors with 3 different documents, and each one has saying that it's all pretty much formatting changes and stylistic changes, there are substantial differences when you go across the 3
Just to say, I did not say there was a style. I said my memo literally lays out the substantive changes. I just want to make that perfectly clear. I did not say that mine was a format change and differences.
Yeah, I'm just repeating what I've heard. That's what I've heard. But yes, you did a very good job of actually laying out those differences. But I want to make a point that when you go across these documents, it's not just stylistic. There are some key substantial differences that could have some very significant consequences. So just keep that in mind, and I'll go around. So I think Sherry, did you have a comment?
I'll pass right now.
Okay. Bill?
Just following up with what Wes just said, and I had the same thought just a few minutes earlier, is that Dick said that it's mostly about format. The feedback from Wes is silent on format, if I read this correctly. It's almost entirely about content, and I think that's where a lot of the focus should be in our discussion moving forward. The formatting is not really an issue at this point. We need to focus on the content. And I'll just go on record, I've been on this before. I think secret voting is not a good idea for this body, and we'll just move on.
Yeah, I don't want to get too much in the details. Any further comments? Kevin?
Yeah,
I appreciate all the effort that's going into looking at these, looking at it. I think there is two different things when I think about it. There's policy and then there's a code of ethics. And I appreciate what Dick was saying about saying maybe there's a 4 or 5 page document that outlines those key things to loyalty, duty of care. That's very clear for board members. But then there's a separate document that has all the procedural things. Oh gosh, I need some coffee at this time of night. That is very important, but maybe it's not. That's policy. So maybe there is a policy document and a code of ethics document that might be appropriate. And also, if there's do we need to utilize a outside third party to look at this too, whatever version we end up with? Does that make sense to have somebody from Maryland Nonprofits or somebody look at it for us too, just to say, hey, this is what other nonprofits of our size do, are do in terms of best practices? That's a question.
Yeah, that could be a very useful tool.
Yeah, I like that.
Janet, do you have any comments?
I was supportive of the original document. I get concerned putting things into layman's terms if they need to be legally binding. So I'd like us to pay attention to that. I mean, generally, I'm not opposed to getting an outside opinion, but I start to question if every single topic that comes up goes to an outside opinion, then why do we have senior staff with the skill sets that they currently have? So, I'm supportive of the original document. I am also supportive of additional clarification if there are things that are unclear, but otherwise, I think the wordsmithing has been a little bit ridiculous.
Brian? Yeah, any comments? Lakey?
Are we
Any
going
comments?
around?
Yeah, I'm just going
Sure.
around.
I have a comment. I'd like to clarify that the months that this was in the previous fiscal year, which was from February to April, but with this body that's in place right now, we had 2 meetings in June. And at that point, this was on the board work session and the board voting meeting. And at that point, it was decided that a policy subcommittee was going to be formed to develop a draft. Wes alluded to this earlier, but I want to restate, we've received documents via email, and as staff, we have no clarity. Is there board consensus on these? Is it an individual sending a document? We're unclear. So it's now been put on the agenda by the Board Operations Committee. And we are already contemplating more steps to take. This is on the next agenda to be voted on. So I too would say I'm not against another party looking at this, but there are professional, expert, certified and licensed senior staff at this organization that put a lot of time and energy and expertise into the document. And to think that we need everything checked by a third party, or that volunteers can write a document and that it is inclusive of all of the kinds of considerations that we have from human resources, from insurance, from lending, from governance, just does not hold water, that is an accurate comparison. And so I do think that this board, at the end of the day, can write and vote whatever you want. That is crystal clear. But I want to be very clear that when we're talking about ethics standards and what we all have to be held to, the board should be held above and beyond what staff is being held to, and not in a separate document that, at least as the draft stands today, is less than the standard that I hold my staff to.
Yeah, I would say that the delays in this are a symptom of larger issues that we're facing as a board and staff. And it's unfortunate it's coming out here. And I don't think we're necessarily going to resolve it until we get to looking at some of those larger issues. I will say that overall, I like Dick's goals. I'm mindful of the need for a document to be sufficient. I don't know if legally enforceable is the right word, but if we're going to do quasi-legal kinds of procedures with each other about our ethics, people, that needs to be clear. But there's also a sort of a tension between what's legally binding, if you will, or legally sufficient versus what's understandable. And if we're talking about human beings, I want to make sure that things are humanly understandable.
So how is, sorry, I'm sorry.
Could I finish my
Sorry.
statement? Just as a reference, because I'm not very worldly, I thought of two large nonprofits that I knew of, the Red Cross and United Way, and I looked them up. And their codes of, the United Way Code of Ethics is 9 pages of text. And the Red Cross is 21 pages, but it's a PowerPoint document that some of the pages are at least half full of pictures, and many of the other pages have pictures. So somehow those two large multi-million dollar organizations have managed to have simpler ethics policies than we have. One of my concerns is, and we don't have time to discuss it now, we have run out of our 30 minutes, is I agree that how to conduct an investigation is an issue, but it's become crystal clear to me that if our modus operandi is to make ethics complaints, we as an organization are not set up well to do ethics complaints because of the structure of our organization. We are the only 10 members of this organization. And so ultimately, every decision, if you think of any appeal of anything, has to come back to us. And that's the only, I can't think of any other way that I wouldn't be comfortable handing off a decision to some other party, unless like we were taken to court, other than a legal type of thing. I wouldn't be comfortable with any other party than us making, this body, not these people, but this body making ultimate decisions. So I think, I look at the flow chart, Andy, that you provided, it's way too simple. I think you know that. It can't be a straight line as it is. There's too many, what if the complaint is against this, and what if the complaint is against that one? So that's an issue. Related to that is two other things. I'm very firm in the belief that no policy that we create can violate our charter or bylaws. So we need to be really crystal clear that the charter is our fundamental document. The bylaws come next, and policies that we create implement things, but we can't create a policy that violates a provision of our charter or our bylaws. And I guess maybe this is along the line, Kevin, that you were talking about. My belief is that if something is already in the law, all we have to do really is, in terms of this kind of document, is say we need to follow the law. So things like the duty of care, et cetera, are our legal responsibilities. I'm all in favor of explanation of that and some documents that says this is what you got to do, but they're not ethics issues. They're legal issues that we have to follow, and that's part of our thing. So I think there are some things that we don't need to include in this that have been. I liked your specificity about what was missing. I don't know that I'm really that hopeful about moving forward, but here we are.
Kevin?
I know, I agree with everything Alan just said. And the reason I mentioned a third party was just to make sure if there's anything related to a nonprofit of our size, of an HOA, that we want to just double check with somebody that, with all due respect to everybody at this organization, it couldn't hurt to have another party look at it for us. And hopefully we can get to a point where we do that. I think it would help. So.
Jenny?
Yeah, I agree with what Kevin's saying. It can't do any harm, and it may be, that there's a way to get something that's 5-6 pages, and Let's not complicate it too much with all the information that we want. So that's very clear. And I agree with Alan, and I don't see this. I see some alleged violations of the charter and the bylaws in some of this drafting. So we can't, if we have to decide if that's a commitment we have or not. So I'd like to follow up on what Kevin's saying. I don't think it'll do any harm. I'm sorry, we didn't think of it earlier, but, better late than never.
Jackie?
A couple things. One, as far as a third party laying eyes on this, Wes took our existing policies and proposed changes to those and outlined what those changes were. That original policy, the basis, what we're operating under now, was developed by third party. It was a combination of in-house counsel and external counsel who have a lot of expertise in this. So it was professional guidance outside that I believe drafted the majority of the policies that we're operating under right now. So another thing that I would say in reference to Alan, you having looked up, the American Red Cross and another organization, I'm required to attend ethics training every year as part of my license. And in one particular ethics training, they gave us what they said was the gold standard for an ethics policy. It was for an engineering firm. It's over 60 pages. I shared it with Wes when he first said he was going to take this on. So I think we have to be careful about starting to label pages and talk about what the American Cross, a huge national organization, is doing. We don't know what supplemental information they have with that, but this was the gold standard. Ethics policies are designed to help organizations navigate all the gray areas surrounding ethics, and that's why the substance in them is so important. So as far as this process goes, you're all aware that the ethics policies are a critical part of CA's governance, and I previously made you aware that in my professional opinion, and I will repeat, that the board should be discussing the revisions that were proposed by General Counsel. The board should be subject to the same ethics policies as employees, along with additional parameters that are specific to the board. Similar to what is currently in place and similar to what General Counsel has proposed for revisions. Instead, what I see is that the board is considering separate standalone policies and enforcement drafted by board members and then to be approved by the board. So the audit committee's charter includes responsibility for monitoring CA's ethics program, and to even consider such a significant change to this revision process, I would strongly recommend getting feedback from that committee. So CA's tone at the top, CA's ethical climate, and CA's commitment to a culture of high ethical standards, it starts with the board.
So I do have one question. And yeah, I'd certainly appreciate that the current ethics policy was drafted by attorneys both in-house and outside. So the question again comes to mind is, yes, it's a quality document. Why is there a need to change it? Why is there a need to update it? And granted, yes, you might like some formatting changes, but formatting is just formatting. What is the key substantial need for updating it?
The majority of the changes in my document, we've been over this before as well, except for the 4 that are new. The majority of the changes were to the reporting ethics violations aspect of the policy. That's one of 4 policies now. It's the last section of the consolidated policy that I drafted. That's where the majority of the changes were made.
The other thing I just want to add procedurally is that part of any good ethics program is revisiting the existing policies and looking at if there are improvements that need to be made, things that can change over time, and lessons learned from when things don't go as we feel that they should have. It's complicated, it's gray, and it is just a good practice as far as our program overall.
I certainly agree. So again, what are those key changes that we need to make?
So there's another document I can resend. It to the board that laid out all of these changes. I'd sent that in April as well. That goes, I will resend it to the board, and it highlights every major change that was made, the relevant ones. And to Jackie's point, when I made my presentation in April, I mean, the policies, I mean, there's 4 of them, hadn't been updated since 2016, 2017, 2018. So they were all updated at different points in time, which again, that lends to inconsistency between the documents. So I will resend the document.
Yeah. So again, I'm not trying to badger you about the differences, but just keep in mind that this process started with the previous board, and there's been a fair amount of turnover. So I'm trying to ask.
Yeah, I'll give it.
That's significant.
I'll provide it.
So I'm just trying to ask the questions that I feel that new board members that are new to the process.
That was provided when we picked it back up in June. I just do want to say that. It was in board packets at that time.
Sometimes hearing it orally also helps.
A couple points. First of all, I would suggest that we look at these as separate documents. First, the actual code, and the second piece as the enforcement piece. They're 2 really separate things, and I wanted to make the code something that people would actually read, because I don't think anybody reads the 28-page thing that we had. And I would suggest that if you take a look at that code that I wrote, you'll find that everything in the old code, plus something that was in a page of the web that's mysteriously disappeared called board documents, is in this thing. It's all there. It's just been arranged a little more neatly. The second thing I'd like to point out is I consulted with 2 attorneys when I wrote this, who reviewed it and said that they liked it. They thought it was pretty good. They were working not officially, so I'm not going to name names, but they were as friends of the author. They did review it and made suggestions which were incorporated. And the final thing is that the reason I got involved in this thing 6 years ago was because we did go to our Sherry Fanaroff, our former counsel, went to an outside consultant who came back with a terribly written document. And there were 4 pieces to it. I took a look at it as a former English major and who has quite a bit of expertise in working with lawyers on documents, and turned it into customer-facing language. And the board looked at the one from the outside consultant and the piece that I had written, and they selected the piece that I had written as a superior piece. I was going to go back and do the other 3 sections, but we got kind of stonewalled on that, and finally the board got bored with the subject and moved on. And I am going to go back with my draft, and I'm going to double check with Wes's comments and any other comments that anybody wants to make, and see if I can make everybody happy. But like I said, this is the highest standard. It's as high or higher than the previous document. And I think it's important to separate this into a board document, because when you start saying, well, for these people you'll do this, and for these people you'll do that, and these people have to do this, it just makes it more complicated and unnecessarily so. And I think it's important all around the organization to simplify things and make them easier to read. And I will just say that I have extensive professional writing and editing skills. I've written advertising copy, strategic marketing, business plans, new business presentations, guidebooks, positioning statements, form letters, news releases, newsletters. And I've worked with extensively with attorneys on disclaimers, warranties, contest rules, instructions, restrictions on advertising to children,
I think Dick's applying for a job.
We got your resume. We got it.
So I'm saying that I have a little bit of expertise here that I wish I would expect to be respected.
Yeah.
I'm not just some anyway. So I would suggest everybody just take a look at that code piece and see if there's anything in there that's not up to standards And it's been organized a little better, and the language has been cleaned up, and I've done a bit of wordsmithing.
So the question, again, the question I have is, from the code's perspective, not the enforcement, because it's clear that there are many changes across the enforcement pieces, but from the code perspective, are there any substantial differences between the code that you provided and the code that was provided?
Apparently, there are 2 pages of differences based
in the
on the
memo.
feedback that we
Well,
had.
no, we got. I thought I was under the impression most of them were in the enforcement side. So basically where I'm going is, if there is consensus on the code side.
No.
No, if you look at
I
page
said, so you separated into two separate, so the original,
I'm trying to find consensus wherever I can.
My original document, you asked what were the changes the changes from the 4 separate documents that we have now.
Yes.
What were the differences to the one I drafted?
Yes.
I said the majority of the changes from mine from the code that exists now were in the enforcement section, okay? The differences between mine and what has been submitted are myriad, and I have them listed in the memo that's been provided.
Because on this memo, you weren't able to get around to it.
That's
No, it's the previous
Memo 2.
Yeah.
Okay, Sherry.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is that there are differences of opinion about content, and that relates to what Bill was saying.
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
And the issues are around process steps and accountability. There are some differences in the content between the 8-page document and the document that Wes presented in April. That took up a lot of time. I think the board looked at it very carefully. I'm very appreciative of the work that you did, but I don't see a reason to go back to April and, in effect, re-adjudicate that. I guess my sense is that simple is always preferable to complex. That when issues arise, you go back to the law. And the law is the law. There's HOA law, there's Maryland law, there's federal law. The board, because we're not employees of CA, are not covered by employment law. And that's a real difference. So there are some very, there are some significant differences. And I think we should not be trying to paper over the differences, but I think we should be looking at them clearly. I don't think it's about language. I think it's about authority. I think it's about process steps. Andy's document, as far as the handling of complaints is concerned, is basically it's basically the way things are now. That may not be really effective any longer. So I think we have to look at other options. And in fact, other options have been suggested. So opening up the procedures part to further discussion will be a lot easier if we can get to a simple ethics code, which, by the way, was the way it was, much more like this document when I first started on the board. So the more complex legal document seems to have accreted over time. It's like barnacles on a boat. You just keep adding more things and more things and more things for every possible situation that you can think of, and you're still not going to have a perfect document. It should be something that any new board member coming in should be able to read, understand, and be able to sign with a full sense that they comprehended.
Sherry, could you send out a copy of that ethics document that you're referring to, the old one?
I think I have one from 2008, 2009.
But if you have an example of one that you like, that could.
Well, I don't want to introduce another another document here.
Okay,
But
enough.
I think getting back to something simpler gives us a way of getting a greater sense of consensus about what is the value and meaning of this document.
Because I'll let Ellen go, and then I'm going to finish up with some comments because we're way over time.
Yeah.
Okay.
First of all, just a big hit the like button on everything you just said, with one exception that I'm just not sure about. And that's, I think we're at a place right now where I don't see a way forward from here with multiple documents sitting in our board packet. We can't choose one, or and then if we say, okay, there's things missing from this one, things missing from that, and things missing from that, how do we reconcile all that? I don't see any other way. I don't know that we necessarily have to go back to April, but certainly some significant things happened in April when 40% of the voting board was not on the board. So there's a lot of missing knowledge and information. And I think we need a path forward to move ahead. So this is not a complete thought, but I think as Lakey said, if I understood what you said, Lakey, that her thought was that, or understanding was that there was going to be a subcommittee and we were going to come up with something. I would like to see that subcommittee include Wes, maybe include Jackie, and get together and have some conversation, and at that level, put some ideas together so that then we can have something, even if it's, here's what we can agree on, and here's the points that we couldn't come to agreement on that we need the board to come to agreement on so that we can move forward. Right now, it's just become like trying to decide which branch of a tree do we like best, and there are too many of them to decide from.
So we're way out of time.
I just don't want to lose Kevin's idea because I think that's good.
No, I think Kevin, I think you have a good idea there. So this is what I recommend. First, we're certainly not in any state to vote on this at the next meeting. So what I would recommend is moving this from a board vote to board discussion. So because there's no way we can vote on this.
Okay.
Are there any objections to that?
Will we have something new to discuss in 2 weeks?
That's where I'm going next.
Okay. Because that would depend, that would affect whether I.
Yeah, so this is where I'm going next on this. So what seems clear is that there's really two parts. There's the code and there's the enforcement piece. So what I'd recommend is that we separate, and I realize that plus you did a lot of work trying to consolidate everything, but I'd recommend at this point that we separate those into two separate but related documents. So we have a code piece and enforcement piece. And then what I'd recommend doing first is trying to tackle just the code piece, because I think there's probably more consensus, not maybe 100%, but more consensus with the code piece. If we can resolve what Wes has in the code piece with what Dick has, I think Andy's piece was mostly enforcement. So there should be basically just trying to resolve with what Dick has versus what Wes has in the code piece. Then we could potentially vote on a code piece in November.
I'm not trying to be contrarian, but the thing that I think the fundamental issue is, and this is actually going to Alan's point, is that the way forward right now is quite difficult, because what Dick is contemplating is not what my document contemplated at all. He wants to make a board that's for the board, by the board, right? Like, I think that's very clear. It's a board document that is for the board, by the board. So like, if we're gonna get together on that, I have to know what my guidance is.
So here's the thing. I read your document, and there's actually a whole section 2, Board of Directors duties and responsibilities. That should be able to line up with Dick's board document, because that's a document for the board, and here's a section for the board. So hoping that we can try to resolve those.
I would be glad to sit down with you, Wes, and we could work on this thing together to come up with something we're both in agreement with.
So do I get to share? No, that's fine. Do I get to share my resume too, as somebody went to Michigan State Law School and was a prosecutor and an administrative law judge? And like, I'm just that's tongue in cheek. But I'm just saying, like, if we were, I wanted to give my opportunity to give my resume, because I don't know if the people that are out there in the public actually know that there's an attorney on this board.
I'll list my resume that one day I actually stayed at a Holiday Inn Express.
There you go. Holiday Express.
I have a question about the concept, because I'm not hearing that there's consensus around Dick's approach. I'm hearing that people want it shorter. So I just want to be very cautious in proceeding, having one board member work with a staff member, because that is not representative of the full board. And when we discussed this previously, which again, 4 people in this room were not here, there was a deep belief that the 10 board members, it needed to be discussed in an open meeting, and not that there would be a small number. Now, this board, as it sits today, made that decision in June that you would have a policy subcommittee. So I just want to be clear, that is Dick Bolton speaking for the board of directors and what he wants in that document. Is that for the full board?
I wasn't envisioning Dick as the only person.
No. What the idea is, we got, so what Dick has here is not a full policy, and I'm sure you'll agree with it.
It's just for the board to discuss.
No, but
it's a foundation to work from.
But it doesn't.
Just like Wes's document was something that would be discussed in an open meeting with the board.
But my point is that this covers just basically the board ethics part, which section 2 covers the board ethics part. So the question I have is, can we at least resolve these 2 documents? If they're just figure out how to, if there are key changes, list those key changes, one red, one blue, to show those key changes. But I think the key thing is, at least can we get to the point where we can at least vote on the code portion, and then we could move ahead to the enforcement portion. Because right now, trying to do the whole thing at once has been running around in circles for the last 6 year. Jenny?
Yeah, the only problem I have with that is, I think the biggest problem facing us, quite frankly, and this is my opinion, is the enforcement. We really need to look at what's been happening in terms of actual handling of complaints, et cetera. There's a lot of issues around that, and we need to deal with that. I don't want to be waiting a couple of months while a lot of things are pending on that issue. So I really think we can walk and chew gum at the same time, and some people can handle the enforcement. And I really would like to just get something from the nonprofit group, just an hour conversation to just see, maybe they have a suggestion. We can listen to them, we can throw it out, we can do anything, share it with staff, but I don't think, I wouldn't turn that down if they offer, so.
Alan?
The one thing I'm not hearing in your suggestion goes back to something, the points that Jackie's made, and that's by doing a separate document, are we saying that the board is not subject to anything in any other document? Or are we saying that this is simply more like Wes's, this is the section that is applicable only to the board and not to other employees, not to employees of the organization.
No. So basically, Wes actually has a section for board. So that's already in Wes's section. So the goal here is to resolve any differences between what's in here, what's in Dick's, and if there are key differences, just basically redline it, so just show the differences side by side so we can actually vote on those differences and we can see more clearly what those differences are. My real recommendation is to try to break this up into pieces and focus, be able to look at the ethics code piece separately from the enforcement piece. So at least we can get, at least we can do it in steps, because right now trying to do the whole thing at once seems to be an impossible task. So, and I think that'll also help us focus on where the structural or the key substantial differences are between all these drafts, because there's a lot of stuff here that's consistent across, and I think we can leverage those consistencies and basically say, okay, this is what's consistent. I think most of the consistencies is in the code part, and so I think we can hopefully get through that part. Licky?
I have just a clarifying question.
Sure.
So the purpose of this memo that's dated October 3rd was to detail the differences. That is what it does. And you just said what we need is an explanation of the differences. So I'm trying to be very respectful and just like, what is the other, how would you like those differences detailed if putting them in a memo and saying this is not included? How would those details be differentiated that would be a clearer representation to the board?
I guess what would help me is you take a base document and say, okay, in black text, this is consistent. We all agree on this. In red text, this is what Wes proposes. In blue text, this is what board member A proposes. Board member green text is what blue member B proposes, et cetera, and have it basically as a red line, so you can actually vote on specific items of text.
And what is the base document?
That's a good question.
That's kind of, okay.
So that's something that we have to all agree on. Alan?
I think what the missing piece, Lake, that I didn't hear you talk about was the discussion piece that would happen in the subcommittee. Because my hope, as I look at the memo of October 3rd, I guess it was, it lists the differences, but to me, then there's got to be, okay, so what's the import of that difference? Can we look at it and say, well, okay, it's not mentioned here, but it's taken care of over there. So I think my hope is that the final document that has all this in black, my hope is it's not just this is all the differences, but I'm looking for a document that says this is what we as a subcommittee have agreed on, and here's the portions that we haven't come to agreement on that the board needs to come to agreement on, and that those would be a much smaller list than the current list of differences between the documents.
Janet?
So, I mean, while I understand what you're saying about a red line, I think the fundamental purpose of Dick's document is to write this completely differently from the way Wes wrote it. So I really don't see where those two documents, I don't think it's simply a matter of the points. It seems to me that approach is taking a completely different, I want to write this in a way that I think makes more sense. And so I don't know how you reconcile those two documents, because it's really not only about the content, it's about the format as well.
That's not how I read Wes's list. Wes's list was very specific about does not include use of personal email
Right,
address.
but if we go with Wes's verbiage, Dick's going to throw a fit and talk to us about,
there's no need to be
the way it's
uncivil.
not written properly, and doesn't flow correctly, and that it doesn't, have a marketing slant to it. I mean,
That's where a subcommittee can hash that out and come to us with.
not if Dick's on the subcommittee. He's pretty inflexible about this.
Let's not
get
It's getting late.
I'm not getting personal. I'm simply saying that Dick has made his opinion about the document and the structure and format of the document very clear.
Okay.
And so I'm struggling to see a path forward where these two documents can converge in a way that satisfies that whole path.
I hear you.
So the question I have for Dick is, with what you produced here, content, not format, could the content you produced here be placed in the format that West has produced?
I'd do it the other way around.
I realize that.
Okay.
That's why I asked the question this way.
Well, the format that West did was to have an all-inclusive document for the entire organization, which doesn't work. And anyway, it's getting late. Let's continue this conversation. I think I'm going to go back over Wes's list and make sure that everything that belongs in this thing is there, and I will present it for discussion from the board. If anybody else wants to take a whack at it, I'm not inflexible.
Okay, thanks. We are way out of time for this. With assuming there's unanimous consent, this should be moved off the board votes because there's no way we're prepared to vote on this next meeting, and moved into discussion.
Yes.
Makes sense.
Agreed.
Next on the agenda is the questions only piece. Considering the time, please keep it short. Any questions for the questions only piece? That's short. Sorry, Sherry.
I did have a question. There is legislation pre-filed at the county council level that is focused on environmental issues. We brought this up, I believe, before. There was a question about following. I'm so tired, I can't even remember what the CB number was.
Liz Walsh's bill? No.
Yes.
71?
Yeah. On
Yes.
the developer
So,
flooding and.
is that something that we can get more information on or have some report out?
Sure. If you could just email, because I think you said, I track the bills, I look at them every week, but if you could help narrow that down for me.
Yeah, I'll try to find it
But
tomorrow.
you said it's
Tomorrow,
you said it's
I'll try
environment.
to find what the
But you said it was based on, it was an environmental bill,
I
Howard
think
County.
I can see.
Okay, thank you.
Alan?
Yeah, I'm curious, I got a question from a resident about a bill that specifically mentions, a county bill that specifically mentions CA, that would put the president of CA in a particular position ex officio, and that seems like that affects CA, but there was no mention of it.
Yes, I'm aware of the bill. It makes either the president or the president's designee. So it could be any staff person.
I'm curious why it wasn't listed as something that affects CA.
Correct. Well, and also because there was no significant impact operationally or financially on that. It's a sound bill. It's just about making a commission for the Asian and Pacific Islander population, pretty much focused on a DE&I type of.
Yeah, no, which I think is
good. Yeah. So, but if that's something that I'm aware of the bill.
We want to get it in a
but
timely.
it's just hard,
It's just nice to know.
it's nice to know and nice to know that to know that you know and you're paying attention.
Could we get the number of the bill? And my concern is they could have already voted on it. Is this the county council?
Yeah, it's county council at CB 72
Yeah, that's 72.
2022.
What did he say?
72. CB 72.
Okay, has it been voted on?
I will check and I'll have it on the next memo.
Thanks. Any other questions?
I just got one quick one.
Sure.
Did anyone know that Owen Brown's turning 50?
No.
Well, they're eligible for AARP now.
There's a party. Everybody's invited.
Cool.
It's Saturday.
That brings us to proposed new topics. Any proposed new topics?
Yeah,
Going
just a quick one.
Sure.
We've talked about this a lot, but Tot Lot's playground policy, we really need one. Or I like what some people were suggesting, I think you were, play areas instead. So that's it.
And that should be something for the next BOC to consider.
Yes.
Been on the board agenda topics log for several months.
Okay.
Yeah, so-
Okay, just keep pushing it, okay?
And, okay,
Chair remarks.
next we're up to chair remarks, and considering it's very late, I will keep it short, but I think it's been successful that we had our first in-person in quite a while, since before I joined the board, and I think it's really facilitated the communication, so I'm looking forward to continuing to have the in-person feature, because I think that really helps. Given that, can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Okay, a second.
That's my motion.
Dick seconds. Are there any objections to adjourning?
Thank you.
You bet.
Meeting is adjourned.